On a deep and silent night, the moon illuminated the majestic castle with a pale light, from whose windows a human voice suddenly sounded. Two masked strangers who had silently entered Princess Violeta's castle. They were standing at the door of her bedroom and arguing about something they clearly did not expect to see the princess and the maid there. There was no time to realize. One of the assassins, at lightning speed, plunged his sword directly into the girl's heart, on whose dress a bright scarlet stain slowly emerged. The maid Abigail fearfully looked at the shining sword blade that flickered in the night with eyes maddened by fear, from which fresh blood drops slowly flowed onto the floor. Numbness and horror enveloped the maid. Covering her mouth with her hands, she silently, with tears in her eyes, looked at Violeta's bloodied body, lying lifelessly on the floor, awaiting a quick death, and inevitable that would follow the princess. At that moment, Abigail recalled the bright moment of their first meeting, when Violeta was sitting in the castle hall in a luxurious dress, reading a book and smiling, illuminated by the rays of the summer sun. A girl of royal blood, the fifth Princess Violeta, had been imprisoned in a huge castle since childhood due to her dementia. That first day, the maid, standing outside the door, was worried and noticeably nervous about a new acquaintance. Imagine her surprise when, upon opening the door, she saw a young woman of good character, surprisingly similar to her, with the same brown hair and large bright green eyes. The princess cheerfully greeted the maid and waved her hand hospitably with a carefree, childish smile. Abigail looked at the 18-year-old girl, who was shorter than her, completely different from the usual real people. The princess was imprisoned in the castle from an early age due to dementia, and needed a maid to take care of her. Violeta behaved like a little girl her whole life. Royal concerns and adult life were alien to her. She loved running barefoot across the large green meadow of the castle grounds. Abigail and the princess often spent time together in a clearing sown with rare flowers and fragrant ones. Sometimes the heroine looked at picture books, but her favorite pastime was weaving crowns of fresh flowers. One beautiful summer day, during one of their usual walks, the princess admiringly placed a freshly woven pale pink crown on the maid's head and was delighted. Violeta's emotions were always sincere and kind. It seemed she could give her love to everyone around her ceaselessly, without dividing people by rank, title, and gender. Abigail returned from memories to the cruel reality. She saw the princess lying in a pool of blood again, and thought she should have died. The heroine, with tears in her eyes, looked at the murderers, awaiting her fate. With trembling lips, she could not utter a word. Then she closed her eyes and lowered her head in fear, preparing for death. One of the assassins loudly said it was time to finish, and ordered his friend to immediately kill the innocent maid. With a skillful move, the girl was pinned to the floor with his foot, placing the sword right next to her neck. The assassin did not hesitate and firmly gripped the sword hilt with both hands, preparing to strike a fatal blow. The girl closed her eyes in fear of death, and tears burst from her eyes. Suddenly, in the total darkness behind the assassin, the figure of another person suddenly appeared. But it was definitely not the second of the strangers. His eyes flashed with rage and madness, but his face was calm and serene, as one of the assassins prepared to strike back. A precise strike from the third-person sword quickly pierced his chest. Abigail frantically clutched her dress and, gasping in fear, looked at the body of the assassin who had fallen nearby. Soon the slaughter ceased, and 3 corpses lay on the floor. Among them was Violeta, in a bloody pale pink dress, innocent of everything, and who had left this world so early. The stranger slowly turned towards the maid and lowered his sword. Without blinking, she stared bewilderedly at the boy with teary eyes. He walked slowly towards her. The girl was frightened and froze, anticipating what would happen next. The sharp blade touched her face again, making her tremble even more from fear. The boy asked in a calm voice to raise her head and look at him. At that moment, Abigail sighed. She raised her head and froze in horror, holding her breath, anticipating her death. The stranger politely asked if she could hear him. The girl remained silent and could not utter a single word. The boy joked that her silence was the ultimate sign of arrogance and asked her again if she could speak. The sharp blade touched the neck and left a bright trail of scarlet blood on the white skin. At that moment, the girl was overwhelmed by a crazy fear of death, and a terrifying thought whirled in her head that she would now die like Princess Violetta. Abigail trembled again, thinking that she would not want to die here for nothing. And now, the boy stared at her and asked her to wait a moment. Then he sighed and moved the sword away from the girl, showing that he did not want to die. The maid put her hand to her throat, where there was a recent cut. The boy sat down opposite her. He brought his hand to her face. He squeezed her cheeks with his fingers, and suddenly noticed a striking resemblance to the princess, saying she had exactly the same brown hair. He turned her head in different directions, examining her in silence. Suddenly, he said that she had exactly the same large green eyes as Princess Violetta, still not letting go of the girl's face. Then the boy suddenly lowered his hand, and Abigail immediately fell to the floor and began to cry out of helplessness. With trembling hands, she wiped her tear-stained eyes and suddenly heard the stranger loudly say that he was not going to kill her. He confidently said that he intended to make her a princess and looked her in the eyes, expecting a reaction. Abigail looked at the boy in silence, not understanding what was happening, who he was, and what he was going to do to her next. The young man leads the girl to another part of the castle, which is on fire and is immediately surrounded by a crowd of uniformed soldiers. Abigail was overwhelmed with emotions. She enthusiastically watched the flames of fire that enveloped the castle in an instant, and laughed out loud. The second chapter of the action begins with Abigail's memories of her recent life as a maid. The girl remembered her first meeting with the princess in the castle, and the bitter, immutable fate of servants. Abigail was preparing for a harsh reality from which there was no escaping. She could not even imagine that one day she would become a maid. Her father's debts fell upon her family immediately after his suicide, because of which she was sold to the old count at the age of 14. The little brown-haired girl learned the cruelty of reality at such an early age. Upon learning of this, the mother, to save her daughter, was forced to leave the house and flee with her family. Immediately after, my mother became seriously ill and fell ill. It seemed as if heaven itself mocked the poor family. As a child, Abigail often lamented her unfortunate fate. She took her mother's hand and cried bitterly. Soon she packed her things and went to seek help for her family. The girl had been through a lot, but she believed that misfortunes would have to end someday. Standing in front of the castle, Abigail sincerely hoped for a miracle, but she never would have thought that she would have to spend the rest of her life in the farthest imperial palace. In the castle, the heroine was promised a decent salary, thanks to which she could pay off a small part of the debt and help her family. And if she meets a prince here, she falls in love and will be the happiest in the world. The maid remembered how they recently walked near the flowers with the princess, her kind large eyes and the sweetest smile in the world. How Violetta rejoiced like a child, placing a beautiful crown on Abigail's head on a sunny summer day. The heroine was surprised and dismayed by such a generous gift from the princess. Having said words of gratitude, the girl gently touched the princess, expressing pure love, devotion, and respect. Suddenly, warm memories gave way to terrible visions. Violetta grabbed the girl's hand, bleeding and burning with fiery heat. The heroine screamed loudly upon seeing the terrible events before her, in which the princess slowly turned to ashes flying in the wind. The memories gave way to reality, and Abigail, trembling completely, collapsed into a chair in another room of the castle. Then she got up abruptly and grabbed the hem of her dress with her cold hands. She ran to the window and saw the castle burning with the bright colors of fire and smoke. The princess's bedroom in the distance is engulfed in fire. The heroine sobs and screams. Why did the unknown young man burn the body? Because Violetta was already dead. The guy dryly replied that any evidence should be destroyed immediately. In the deep silent night, the sound of wheels was heard. The carriage moved slowly, carrying the stranger and the maid, and the unknown young man who saved her life. They sat opposite each other and stared fixedly. The boy asked the girl for her name, surname, and where she was from. The maid replied that her name was Abigail Diloa. Closing her eyes, she began to talk about her home, which was located on the northern border, and how everything suddenly changed. Her father was a writer and ruled several border villages, but he committed suicide, leaving her with her sick mother and her sisters, trying for 3 years to pay off the nanny's debt for her siblings, but without success. Like members of other small aristocratic families, she easily got the position of maid. She needed money and not what happened tonight. The girl nervously asked why the boy saved her and allowed the princess to die, and who was he anyway? The stranger paused, waiting for the girl to come to her senses and calm down. Lachiel of Edelgard, Duke of the House of Edelgard, he said politely. The heroine had heard about Duke Edelgard, who recently died along with the prince. It turned out he was his son. The girl timidly crumpled her dress with her hands, trying to understand that the son and heir to Duke Edelgard, who was the maternal uncle of the crown prince and nephew of the queen, was sitting opposite her. The duke laughed, noticing her knowledge, and asked if she would like to know more information about him. Realizing that Princess Violetta's cousin was in front of her, Abigail angrily shouted that she did not regret her cousin's death at all, and that she did not understand what was wrong with him. It turned out that the duke had never seen his sister before. He only had the opportunity to see a corpse, which evoked no kindred feeling. He lived his life and had nothing to do with the princess, so the death was on par with the death of murderers. Abigail became furious. For the first time in her life, she really wanted to hit someone, specifically the duke, and said that she would rather die along with Violetta. Tears burst from my eyes upon realizing the cruelty of the man sitting opposite me. The duke, seeing the crying, squirmed and asked to be immediately rid of these disgusting tears. He said that crying people were very annoying, which made the princess shudder and feel fear again. Hearing these words, she decided to act with perseverance. She took a deep breath and started screaming and crying even louder, causing complete bewilderment in the duke. A sharp cry made the boy angry and twisted his face into an unpleasant grimace. And the girl, having achieved her goal, quickly stopped crying and fell silent. Lachiel said he was very tired of her hysterics and lowered his gaze. At that moment, the carriage stopped in the impenetrable midnight darkness. In the silence of the trees, the duke announced their arrival at the location, and Abigail had no idea where they had arrived. He got out and cordially invited her to the Edelgard estate, which stood out behind him in the darkness. When asked why she was brought here, the duke replied that a well-played play requires practice. Abigail stared fixedly at the boy and waited for the dialogue to continue. "You will play the role of a princess," he said. The performance, in which she was destined to play the role of an imperial person, promised to be truly magnificent. They sat at the table opposite each other, who slowly handed the golden bowl with carved patterns directly into the girl's hands. The duke spoke of the resemblance between Violetta and the maid, promising to find the best doctor for her mother and take care of the lives of her younger brothers, paying off all debts and solving all problems. Awaiting her consent, Abigail realized what the duke was planning by giving her a glass of poison and time to think, based on the fact that no one in the palace would perceive her as an unfortunate maiden victim, but would take her for a murderer or an accomplice. The idea of a new acquaintance's madness bewildered the girl. Smiling maliciously, the young man waited, leaving no other choice. The girl had no choice but to listen and obey the orders, for only thanks to him did she survive the bloody massacre. In the main hall of the estate, a message was heard about a fire in the castle of the poor exiled princess. The young man stood behind it and told a version of how the empress's nephew, upon leaving his palace on a dark night, Duke Edelgar was the first to discover the fire. He was safe thanks to his personal maid, Abigail Dailoa, who sacrificed herself to save the princess. The imperial court, as a reward for the maid's sacrifice, will return the title of Dailoa, which belonged to her family, and will generously reward her according to all available laws. It reads in the new script of the play. The Duke announced that from now on Abigail Dailoa would die and become a princess. The girl was very different from Violetta, but the boy promised to make her an exact copy of Violetta. The plan seemed well thought out, and thought out to the smallest detail. The young man asked her if she knew the names of Wilhelmina, Calliope, Arion, which were the names of previous empresses. Abigail, angry, stopped reading the script and looked at the scoundrel who was in front of her. A malicious smile flashed across the boy's face. At first, he was simply going to ruin her line of succession. But then an exiled princess appeared who, as it turned out, was not disabled, and her mental disorder caused by an illness at an early age was quickly eliminated. But she had no way to talk about it due to her status. The girl shouted emotionally, not knowing what would occur to him next. The young woman was raised by a nanny and a maid who accompanied her, reading alone in a closed palace. She also acquired a good education. The story of the transformation of a mentally weak person into an ordinary person. And ordinary flowed from Lachiel's lips. According to him, a mentally retarded woman could not become an heiress. According to the assumption, marriage between cousins is possible according to imperial law. And the plan will work brilliantly if you marry the empress. It did not matter how many princes the emperor was given concubines, but the princess born of the empress would have priority in succession. He claimed that the princess's death was for the best. And Abigail is the same age, and looks like the damned emperor with hair and eyes. The Duke put his hand to his hair and noted that such a pretty face should please the emperor. A lock of brown hair slipped through his fingers. Without ceasing to stroke the girl's hair, he spoke about the impossibility of turning a princess into an empress. Abigail confusedly asked which of his insidious goals the Duke was pursuing. Clutching a lock of hair in his hand, through clenched teeth, he spoke of a grand plan to destroy an entire empire. Abigail shouted that this was impossible, but he quickly convinced her otherwise. The Edelgard family made a great contribution to the foundation of the empire, in whose family were the greatest empresses. Half of them were princesses related to the imperial family by blood ties. The idea of transforming an ordinary girl into an empress really seemed like madness. It is one thing to become a princess, but becoming an empress is much more difficult. The young man called the entire family tree just an illusion, and asked how much blood, in her opinion, of the first emperor remained in the current one. Abigail argued that she obtained her rightful place only through pedigree and lineage, which the Duke vehemently denies. To this, he shamelessly declared his merits only thanks to his mental abilities. The girl replied that she did not have a mind and majestic abilities like the Duke's. But Lachiel confidently promised to help in all difficulties. Strength and common sense were gradually leaving the heroine, and tearfully assured him that she could not do it. Abigail expressed her concern about the brilliant plan, which could ruin, but the Duke assured that there would be no mistakes. Then she couldn't stand it and shouted that she couldn't do anything. The young man's hand gently touched the girl's trembling fingers. He knelt down in front of her, touched her cold hand and white skin with his lips, and asked her not to worry, declaring that he would surely do everything himself. The Duke stood in the castle office and took a book with a precious red binding from the shelf. Abigail's steps were heard behind her as she cautiously entered the room. Lachiel opened the door for her and told her that she would live here for a while. The bedroom was the very heart of Edelgard, where the Dukes lived, which belonged exclusively to the Edelgard family. The girl admired the beauty of the new home, in which she would be completely safe and not attract much attention, judging by the boy's words. A light tap on her shoulder made her startle upon seeing the book in front of her. The hero held a stack of textbooks in his hands, announcing the imminent training that the girl had to undergo and learn the rules. She was surprised and opened her eyes wide in astonishment. The first lesson was dancing, in which the girl did not shine with her choreographic skills, flexibility, and smoothness. The next was reading, where she also did not succeed, since she did not understand the scribbles in the books at all. The third lesson brought more joy to Abigail for the sake of an upright posture and a beautiful gait. She had to carry books on her head, staggering and extending her arms in different directions. She walked in circles around the room, testing the Duke's patience. The young man silently held the script in his hands. He looked at his students' achievements and waited for a miracle. He sighed, turned his head in different directions, and was noticeably nervous. Abigail noticed a strange expression on the boy's face and obvious disappointment. She got angry, slammed the door shut, and abandoned the training, annoyed that the young man was too demanding of her. Powerless, the exhausted girl lay down on the bed, spreading her arms in different directions and sighing from fatigue. It turned out that getting an education was not so easy. Abigail silently looked at the ceiling, overwhelmed by memories of what had happened. How the Duke knelt before her and kissed her hand, promising to do everything himself. Violetta's cheerful face, still alive with a flower in her hands, remained in my memory forever. The heroine approached the blanket, exhausted by thoughts of her near future, and fell deeply asleep. The bright summer sun shone over Edalgar Manor, where Abigail spent her first night. Without knocking, the Duke entered the room, seeing a girl still asleep in bed. She slept soundly, while Lackwill seethed beside her because, of course, this was better than her tears. But at least she realized what situation she was in. He touched Abigail's head with his hand, making sure she was still fast asleep. While sleeping, the heroine began to mumble something inaudible about her mother. The boy flinched and removed his hand. She mumbled that a boy had invaded her dream and was talking nonsense about making her an empress. The boy began to get a little angry at such revelations from the sleeping beauty. He reached his hand towards her head, hoping to quickly wake up the future empress, hitting her hand onto the pillow next to her. The Duke asked her to wake up, but she was still muttering something in her sleep about a rude voice. With one move, the boy pulled the blanket off the girl so she would wake up quickly and stop talking nonsense. Abigail, drowsy and disheveled, opened her eyes and stared fixedly at the boy. The hero stood in front of her with an angry expression on his face and asked her if she had slept well. Pointing at the time, he noted that it was time to wake up, since the sun had already risen long ago. Abigail showed no great desire to wake up immediately and said that the clock showed that there was still a long time until dawn. They were off by 30 minutes. She observed, to which the girl replied that he could not be a little more respectful. "How can I behave so disrespectfully towards you, Your Highness?" The young man joked, infuriating the girl. He said that she definitely needed to know something. "The Empress may arrive today, or rather, tomorrow morning. The Empress Pascalia of Edelgard appears before us, the princess's mother." Abigail was noticeably nervous about this unexpected news, and he grabbed her shoulder tightly. The girl feared that the Empress would understand everything immediately when she saw her. The boy said that news had already spread about the rescue of the princess from the Fire Palace, as well as the news about the death of Abigail Dailoa. "Don't say you've already contacted my family," the girl shouted, jumping abruptly out of bed. The Duke replied that he had stopped the rumors about her death for now so he could deal with the family, before anyone started demanding confirmation of her survival, minimally erasing the traces of the surviving Abigail Dailoa. She crumpled the dress with her hands, nervous that everything happened so fast. The news of her daughter's death will upset the mother who has just started treatment. The girl imagined her death and realized that Abigail Dailoa had finally come to an end. Sadly, she asked the Duke to erase her existence in this cruel world. Tears of despair filled my eyes, and a suffocating, unpleasant lump formed in my throat. From now on, you will have to erase your past identity as Abigail Dailoa to be able to become part of the royal family. The girl perfectly understood the futility of what was happening and promised the Duke to do everything he said. He said that her status was not very significant now, and that there was no point in getting rid of it. The young man noticed that she was no longer a servant and did not have to follow instructions. Abigail decided that he was trying to cheer her up. Who will become empress in the future cannot be a servant. Lost in her thoughts, he stared fixedly at the girl who understood nothing, sure that she had no other choice. He fell silent. She smiled without understanding what the Duke was trying to do now. Then she got up, said it was time to go, and headed for the door, asking His Highness to be more attentive in her new training. Thoughts were confused in her head, because yesterday she had a completely different life. She dropped onto the soft bed, thinking about her new royal destiny. The next day, a pleasant female voice was heard in the castle, calling the Duke by his name. Behind him stood a girl in a blue robe. Her face was not visible under a large hood. She removed the hood with a smooth movement and looked at Lachiel with bright amber eyes. The Duke was preparing to begin his rehearsed performance and realized that Empress Pescalia of Edelgard herself was behind him at that moment. This morning, the Duke was near the window and watched as the carriage in which Pescalia of Edelgard was located approached. The mother of Princess Violetta herself, who is now replaced by Abigail. She was walking down the castle hallway. The young man froze, anticipating the meeting upon hearing her approaching steps. The Empress entered the office and saw the Duke standing near the table. She slowly approached him in a luxurious blue dress. The Empress's gaze was extremely severe, and her face expressed emotion. Taking off her hood, she said that Lachiel had done a good job. The boy sighed and continued to look into her eyes in silence. He started the conversation affably and noted that he would be happy to meet the Empress if she had informed him of the visit in advance. To which the girl replied that she had not come here for his jokes. Pescalia heavily struck the table with her hand, wanting the fun to end. She wanted to know where her son was now. The young man sarcastically said that only he remained of the Edelgard family now. Her nephew, which annoyed the Empress. He supposed the Empress had come here, worried about his condition. Pescalia clenched her fist and loudly expressed her indignation at the Duke's act. Who dared to take Violetta out of the castle and bring her to his mansion without permission, because she perfectly knows who he is. Lachiel fell silent and paused, feeling the tension in the conversation. "I see how happy you are," he said, smiling maliciously. Sighing deeply, the Empress lowered her head. He turned around, reminding her of their agreement to hand over the princess earlier, and saw no difference if he took her himself. The argument about times from 10 years ago caused an outburst of anger in Pescalia, accusing the young man of lacking common sense. Everyone should have forgotten Violetta, since there should be no disabled people in the imperial family. Tears of bitterness for her daughter appeared in the girl's amber eyes. She turned around, sobbing, and hiding her tears from the Duke. She was well aware that, ostensibly, Violetta was alive, but in reality it was just a deception. The real princess was no longer there. Could the Empress accept the fact that her son Mikhail, and his daughter Violetta, in whose veins her blood flowed, died in 1 month? Mikhail's death caused the collapse of the empire, unlike her sister, whose death was only a loss. Realizing that the Duke's aunt was completely alone became painful and unbearable. Wiping away her tears, she asked where he had left her son. The answer that the princess was in the Duke's bedroom infuriated her, followed by shouts about her madness. The Empress glared threateningly at her interlocutor. The Duke said that the princess was safe, and that there was no need to worry so much. In response, the Empress calmed down, explaining her behavior with a clouded mind after everything that happened. She apologized, completely forgetting about the recent death of Lachil's father. The long-awaited deceptive play by the Duke began with a message about the excellent health of the princess. The Empress did not believe his words and opened her mouth in surprise. The boy slowly took a red-bound book from the shelf, preparing to continue his rehearsed story. The message about the complete recovery of the princess, of whom there were no traces of dementia, left Pascalia in shock. Duck, covering her mouth with her hand, she barely held back tears and held her breath. Without thinking twice, the lady ran to the office door, making noise with her heels, while the Duke behind her bitterly lamented the deception, which was the only sure way to preserve the family tree. He hurried out of the office as the rustling of the royal robe tail was barely heard in his walk. The bedroom door opened slightly, and a young brown-haired woman lay on the bed. Locking the fifth princess in the castle was not her idea, but of the royal relatives. They were convinced that the only true path for the imperial princess was imprisonment, and that it would be better for her. The little one's gaze, whom the nanny brought to the castle at the last meeting, promising her that her mother would be waiting for her there, pierced the operator's memory. The bitter moment of separation cut the mother's heart like a knife. But now she was here, alive and kicking, right in front of her. Her little Violetta, who had grown into a beautiful girl. Pascalia lovingly touched her daughter's hand with warmth and maternal care. She couldn't take her eyes off the princess, and smiled while looking at her little baby. In that second, the mother's heart couldn't take it, and the Empress burst into bitter tears near the princess's bed. The Duke stood at the bedroom door and watched what was happening. He chose to turn away and look no further. The Empress took the fake daughter's hand in hers and pressed it against her face. She remembered her brother. I remembered my son, who died at such an early age. And now I saw before me the one who was supposedly my blood daughter. The people her whole family loved so much could disappear like this. The sleepy girl slowly opened her eyes and saw a stranger in front of her. She blinked and remained silent, implying that the Empress herself was standing in front of her. The Empress carefully took the girl's hand. She pressed it with both hands against her mother's chest. Abigail was tormented by the question of who she sees in front of her. And where is this damned Duke, who wants to help with everything so much? Pascal noted the girl's surprise and said that such a reaction was expected. She jumped out of bed excitedly when the Empress took her hand and placed it on her shoulder. She had a soft, calm voice that inspired confidence. 13 years have passed since the last meeting with my daughter. Then the heroine clearly realized who was in front of her, recalling that the Duke had warned about the Empress's visit. She did not understand what she should do now alone. Abigail lowered her head, anticipating how the insidious deception would now be revealed. Thoughts whirled like a whirlwind in the girl's head. Perhaps the Empress already knew that she was not a real daughter. The desire to kneel and beg for forgiveness came to Abigail. That if the Empress really considers her daughter, maybe she will tell her the truth. The girl began to cry over the abomination of the bitter deception in which she now had to participate. Pascalia smiled sweetly and asked if she was afraid of her, still holding her hand. The woman's eyes were kind and sincere, clearly not wishing to harm anyone. Abigail nervously clutched the hem of her dress with her other hand. She trembled and could not utter a word while wanting to tell the Empress the whole truth. Tremors enveloped the body more and more, while Pascalia gently asked her to calm down. She knew this was not her real daughter, and told the girl so, thus surprising the young woman. No matter how useless she is as a mother, how could she make a mistake and not recognize her true daughter? Your Majesty, said the girl with her mouth wide open in surprise. The Empress knelt before her and told her she had foolish hopes, even knowing that the girl in the bedroom was not her daughter. She still dreamed that she would open her eyes and call her mom. She didn't think it would make any difference. Abigail was completely lost, not knowing what to answer. She burst into tears, regretting her action and the deception that occurred. The Empress sweetly noted that she was as naive as her daughter, that she didn't know how to lie, and that she actually looked a lot like her. The girl burst into tears, not suppressing her emotions, and began to sob right in front of Pascalia. The Empress put her hand to her face and carefully wiped away the tears rolling down her cheeks. Having said words of gratitude for being by her deceased daughter's side in the last minutes of her life, Abigail calmed down a little. The Empress asked her if she was the same maid who was supposedly dead. Judging by Lachel's words, she said that she knew her, and it was she who secretly ordered the lady-in-waiting to choose Abigail as a maid for her daughter. The expectations were justified, and this is exactly how the Empress expected to see her. The girl thought she would work as a servant in a small family, and not in a royal family, considering the Empress a good person who chose her as a maid for her daughter. But now she has to deceive Pascalia. Amidst tears, she admitted that she had made a treacherous mistake by listening to the Duke. The Empress turned her head and began to convince her otherwise. Emotions overwhelmed the girl, whose kind heart finally could not stand the lie. Screaming for forgiveness and blaming herself for everything, she jumped off the bed. Abigail said she couldn't protect Her Highness and dared to survive without feeling shame, for which she would accept any retribution from Pascalia if she wanted to do so, and gladly accept punishment for her sins, falling before her interlocutor and flooding the floor with bitter tears of repentance. That day, no matter what Lachel said, the best solution was to jump out of the carriage window. The Empress replied that she did not blame the girl, because she could not have done anything in the situation that had happened. With her head bowed, Abigail mumbled that the princess had not suffered before her death. Pascalia sighed. These words brought her relief. And calm. She squeezed the girl's shoulders with her hands. She looked her in the eyes with confidence and affectionately called her by name, confidently expressing her unexpected desire to make Abigail her daughter. The Empress's words surprised the heroine. She looked with great anticipation. Pascalia heard that the Duke was going to make her a princess by asking the girl about it, calling the whole thing a stupid story. She shouted with her big eyes wide open. The lady of royal blood placed her hand around the heroine's neck and said that she did not know Lachiel's plans, but she felt that he was not indifferent to her fate, feeling enormous shame for her actions. The maid begged for punishment for everything. Pascalia insisted that she couldn't stand it and could not allow her to disappear in that way. Her brother's son, daughter appeared in memory. They shouldn't have disappeared so quickly at will. Abigail didn't know what would happen next, and she was very worried. The Empress admitted that she could not bear Violetta's disappearance from this world. Pascalia gently stroked the girl's head and offered again to become her daughter, the same princess who should not have left this world. She hugged the maid tightly and carefully embraced her, asking her to save her dead daughter. Pascalia rested her head on the girl's shoulder, willing only that her daughter remain alive in this world. It was pouring rain, and lead clouds hung like a thick blanket over the carriage, towards which a girl in a blue robe approached with deep sadness. The Duke looked out the window at the carriage, with the Empress moving away from the estate. A scandal began to erupt between him and Abigail, accusing her of behaving like an idiot who could only suck her fingers, to which the girl threateningly declared the innocence of the Empress. The maid confidently declared that the game was perfect, putting her hands on her hips and raising her head arrogantly. The Duke smiled and turned suspiciously. The two of them stood up and looked out the window, large raindrops rolling down the glass. Both consider the Empress a good person, or not very good, as the Duke corrected. The girl asked if Pascalia was a good person, to which Lachiel replied that he knew nothing to expect from her. Abigail turned to the Duke, thinking about his strange behavior. The Empress immediately realized that she was not a princess, and the Duke knew it now, remaining silent and sighing about everything that had happened. Pascalia of Edelger looked out the window, feeling deep sadness and longing for her daughter. The rain began to pour harder as the carriage moved away from the Edelgard mansion. Saying goodbye to Abigail, the Empress promised that sooner or later they would see each other again. The girl paid homage and respect to the royal person. Pascalia turned around and replied that now the maid would definitely become her daughter. Lachiel and Abigail remained silent, watching the storm outside the window. The girl's gaze turned towards the young man who had dragged her into an insidious deception. The heroine was worried about saving the Empress's daughter. Pascalia's words about the continuation of her daughter's life in the person of the maid made us believe that she did everything right. Leaning her head on her shoulder in a recent meeting, the girl promised to become her daughter. Now, having chosen the path by which she will become a princess, there is no turning back. The Empress uttered words of gratitude, sincerely hugging the girl who was destined to become Violetta. Pascalia warned that sooner or later she would be officially returned to the palace, and she would send her lady-in-waiting beforehand, who would have to take care of everything, promising to pretend to Lachiel that she still doesn't know the truth. She smiled and called the Duke a boy, allowing him to play with her as soon as his soul desires. This whole upcoming game gave the girl mixed feelings. How to play if she immediately confessed everything to him? Lachiel broke the silence and asked if all this seemed strange to her. That not only he, but also the Empress, agreed to make her a princess, even if she lost her entire family, which seemed quite risky. This is why they went so far, involving a simple maid in this performance. A loud thunderclap made the girl flinch. The Duke sat down, immersed in his thoughts about the death of the Crown Prince and former Duke of Edelgard. He asked her if Abigail remembered the former Duke. At that moment, clear memories of rumors arose in the heroine's head. This happened recently and caused great trouble, as she heard, and then the whole capital was in complete chaos. The capital guards and the imperial guards were mobilized and scattered everywhere, controlling the entire city for almost a week. Abigail did not understand what he meant and turned her head towards the young man. She said she didn't remember those days well. And turning her head towards the window, she noticed that she didn't know what the world was like back then. The father then worried about the prince even more than his own son. Their relationship was like that of a son and a related father. He never had such similarities in interests with his father. Only in appearance, so Mikkel was the same father to him, just with the same interests. His father taught him everything and raised him like his own son. Lachiel smiled at the fond memories of his family. He spoke of the great kindness of these two good people of royal blood, and of his great love for them. Abigail filled up with pleasant feelings when she heard the Duke talk about his family. Remembering her mother, brothers, and sisters, she clutched the dress to her chest and thought about the value of family. The Duke continued the story of that day, which he still clearly remembers, when his father and Mikkel went out to their beloved home. Unlike him, who does not recognize such useless activities, they did more than just a short trip from home to the outskirts of the capital, to the grounds built by his father, especially for Mikkel. In recent days, he had felt very uneasy about the impossibility of leaving the capital, and tried to do everything possible to keep Mikkel safe, which is why 30 guards were scattered throughout the area. The number of guards exceeded those remaining at the official residence in the capital, in a small area where an accident somehow occurred. Abigail listened to the Duke's story, bewildered. Lachiel was in his office that day when an incident occurred on the way back from the house. The door was knocked on, and the man reported the problem that occurred to Lord Lachiel. The Duke did not immediately understand his alarmed interlocutor. He froze and stopped signing important documents with a pen when he heard the terrible news about the crashed carriage. 30 guards, but the carriage still overturned from a small hill. But the victims were the head of the Empire's highest state clan, Duke Edelgard and Crown Prince Michael, the Empress's son. The girl was indignant at the high presence of guards, and the incident that occurred, which theoretically was not dangerous. but turned out to be tragic. The Duke confirmed her suspicions and agreed that the incident itself seemed strange. Abigail supposed it wasn't just an accident. The Duke argued that the incident was insignificant, in which no one could have died, suspecting a previously planned incident in which they were supposed to die. The heroine did not understand who he was specifically referring to. A man dressed as a coachman was found dead, and it turned out not to be the man she knew. No trace of the royal coachman was found, but there was a carriage that, for some reason, suddenly turned onto another road. Abigail supposed that they had actually replaced the coachman. Most likely, this happened while the carriage was moving, and the man occupying the coachman's place planned from the beginning to die with them, even though many observed his father. And Mikkel, the incident was not discovered until 6 hours later. This was because the gamekeepers and 2 guards who were on duty on that stretch of the road disappeared just like the coachman, without leaving a trace. The Duke suggested possible rumors about this incident. The imperial carriage was made of special material for safety reasons, and there is not the slightest possibility that it was an accident. But the cause of death was massive hemorrhage caused by carriage debris piercing their bodies. The girl found it strange and completely unnatural. It was as if someone knew the route, the patrol time, and chose that location, and time in particular to be discovered as late as possible. And the carriage broke down on purpose so that everything would seem credible. And then even the organs were bent accordingly. Abigail realized that the death was not an accident, but a planned murder, and well thought out. The young man noticed that if no one had intervened, his father and Mikkel would have escaped with simple bruises of various degrees of severity. Death was not due to a failed blow to the head. The cause was extensive bleeding. The heroine thought about it, wondering who would need this and would benefit from it. The young man turned and said that the prince and the Duke were dead, and that he and the Duchy of Edelgard kept silent and still left the country in the dark. The girl said that everything looks as if the criminals were not particularly hiding a special murder in which there are so many oddities. The Duke agreed about the strangeness of the incident and asked if she was familiar with another similar incident. Abigail did not remember this having happened. Then Lachiel reminded her of the unexpected and strange murder of Violetta. The girl got scared and did not believe his words. How would the world perceive it if she died? In any case, with her or without her, the princess would have died anyway. It would have simply been an unfortunate death of poor Violetta, and no one would have known about the murderers. The question of who could do this bewildered and worried Abigail. Apparently, it was about the Marquis of Cardinger and the first queen, Biddies of Cardinger. The girl opened her eyes wide and pressed her lips together. Lackwell smiled and considered this news not so surprising. He believed that the death of the crown prince could undoubtedly benefit the presumed murderers, claiming that all the evidence was there, but that it would still not be enough, because the queen's name was not written there. A sword was left at the crime scene, made of ore extracted in the territory of the Cardingers, which they intentionally left behind. In the end, the whole truth will remain hidden. The terrible acts they committed will be buried forever in a dark closet. Abigail denied that the death of the prince, heir, and the Duke could be hidden, even if Violetta's death wouldn't worry anyone. To which the Duke replied about the high rank of whoever covers up crimes. Unlike all the victims, and even higher than those who did all this. A thunderclap burst outside the window behind the young man. Someone clearly wanted to hide the entire truth about the events in this country. Specifically, the Emperor of Grandonia. The Emperor had no intention of killing his children with his own hands, staying away from the murders. The first queen simply took advantage of the situation. And the Emperor really didn't care about the truth. Lachiel shouted that he was not going to do what they wanted. After the death of his father, and the crown prince sitting and doing nothing was a shameful disgrace. And he didn't want the Empress to become the one who lost everything and be defeated by them. That's why he chose Abigail. The Duke's story became a frank confession for the girl. She thought he had everything, but in reality, he had a very hard time. Abigail smiled and thought it was funny to hear this from someone who had no authority of his own. And she accepted it. With her hand on her heart, she said she was not involved in this against her will, and chooses to stay with His Excellency, calling it Abigail Dailoa's final decision. The young man stared fixedly at the girl. The performance of the deception began. The girl took the Duke's hands and told him that they were cousins now. And she is his only cousin in the whole world. Just as Lachil wanted, only fake. Holding hands, no one had any doubt that Abigail would become a real Princess Violetta, the son of the House of Edelgard, and the daughter of the House of Dailoa. As equal conspirators in rights, they are ready to risk their lives and swear not to break this agreement until their death. The 46th day of spring in the year 806. The Duke warned that now the girl could not sleep peacefully as before, because he would hire a tutor to turn her into a real princess. In the great hall of the Edelgard estate sat Laquil, Abigail, and a young man. The young man sat tiredly, while the girl was indignant at his half-hour of silence. With her eyes she looked for answers and support from Laquil, but the expression on his face remained unyielding. Abigail remembered her new royal status, and how her mother taught her that high-status people should speak first. Out of habit, the girl coughed and timidly started a conversation, asking if the mentor was in front of her. A young man in a beige suit made an elegant bow and introduced himself as Kyle Thornton, the Duke's first assistant, and asked to be considered the Duke's most trusted advisor. As one of the Duke's few confidants, his job is to spy, know people's past, their needs, and corrupt activities. And before he could continue, the heroine stopped him, wondering what they should do next now. Kyle slowly flipped through the pages of the book he had been holding all this time, asking her if the girl has any skills or hobby, offering to create an educational plan based on her knowledge and adjust the schedule according to the answers. Abigail exhaled and felt more confident. The heroine organized her thoughts and prepared to start the story. Bewildered, Abigail tried to organize her thoughts. The girl learned to play the piano for about 10 years, but now her hands have become rough. She also studied for 5 years to play the violin, but now there will be problems with this too. She pointed out that she wasn't very good at drawing, and she learned the official language of the Western continent and took several horseback riding lessons. The young man listened to her attentively. Lachil asked what was wrong with that. Kyle asked her not to worry and began to write something frantically in his book. No one knew how this story would end, in which Her Highness Violetta would soon become perfection itself. Kyle stated with interest that Her Highness Violetta was simply excellent. The girl opened her mouth in surprise. She repeatedly asked who the young man considered excellent. She wanted to know where there was a musical instrument in the closed palace, and if there was one who taught her to play, implying that she lived in a place where it was impossible to learn languages and learn the art of music. Although there was a piano there, she had never seen anyone play anything on it. Kyle was quick to point out that if she practiced a little, her skills would return quickly. The same goes for the violin, suggesting that she tell everyone she learned to play it recently, just to pass the time on the Duke's estate. Imagining a picture in which the princess appears as a naturally talented genius, a prodigy whose fingers glide with ease and softness over the keys, creating beautiful melodies. The girl asked if it was too late to become a child prodigy, to which the Duke laughed, saying she was already too old to be a genius. If we look at it from the other side, Her Highness has the ability to play as many as 2 musical instruments, which should undoubtedly make a good impression of her among the capital aristocracy. And the official Western language is mandatory for the nobility. However, in a short period of time, it is necessary to raise the level of her development a little more. Kyle pointed out, also paying special attention to the talent in linguistics. Abigail asked if they really wanted to turn her into a genius in such a short time. To which Kyle nodded affirmatively, adding about the need to master the Peloberg language and the heritage language to a good level. The only ones who managed to master these three languages were the first empress and the third princess, which was the envy of the aristocracy. Despite the fact that the girl appeared here recently, it is necessary to master the training as soon as possible, said Kyle and smiled broadly. Indignation and anger enveloped Abigail, who had no choice but to obey. She asked again that it is not enough to know the spoken language of these countries well, given the 13 years of isolation. The young man replied that an isolated princess could not learn this in a year. In addition to this, it is necessary to acquire knowledge of history and philosophy, which are also basic for royalty. Abigail was shocked by such news, and it seemed unrealistic to implement it. Kyle asked her if she was talking about weapon possession and horseback riding. The girl answered affirmatively and asked about the possibility of finding her a weapon now to shoot the young man in the head immediately. Lucky observed silently what was happening to her. Kyle continued the conversation about the shooting, starting by asking how the heroine gained access to knowledge that is not freely available to a young woman, and asked to talk about the special skill of using weapons. Her father had invested a lot of money in the development business and firearms development, and often talked about how the era of swords would soon end, and the era of firearms that can shoot several times in a row will begin, marking the beginning of a new era. Both young people attentively followed the words of their interlocutor. However, these statements were ahead of their time, and his business failed, although the sword is now more practical due to circumstances like rain, during which the firearm is useless due to the need to constantly reload it. Bringing her hands to her chest, she announced that the era of weapons was approaching soon. The Duke looked surprised, seeing such strange behavior from the young woman for the first time. The young people looked at each other in silence. Kyle smiled and suggested she become a strong woman and influential, who could influence the passage of time. She became embarrassed and blushed. She did not expect to hear such flattering words about herself. The image of a strong woman who would be able to take control of political affairs and military, as well as annexing new lands. The legitimate empress's daughter would be followed by conservative nobles. It meant the advantage of using a new weapon. That a woman acts as such, it would allow reaching not only capitalist industries, but also progressive powers, stopping the young man's wild imagination. Abigail stated that they had too many plans for her, having little experience and skill in shooting. The Duke declared his goal to impress others with the girl's skills, which would ultimately turn out to be an illusion. The warlike image of a young woman with a weapon will reach the people. Goosebumps ran down Abigail's body upon realizing the complete mistake and the scale of everything. Kyle continued his 3-year study list, which included imperial studies, politics, diplomacy, economics, philosophy, and law as a bonus. It turns out 4 years of study. The girl thought, and she couldn't believe what she was hearing. How long would she have to study? The hall door suddenly creaked, and a woman's hand in a white glove opened it, holding it open. A beautiful lady in a celestial satin dress was heading towards the heroes. The three of them turned towards the stranger. Looking at her surprised, Duke Lachil rose from his seat to greet the lady who entered the hall. He politely put a hand behind his back. He bowed elegantly and kissed the stranger's hand. The threatening expression on the face of the lady with glasses was replaced by a pleasant smile. Light and benevolent, Kyle made a greeting bow, bowing his head in front of the girl, and expressed his respect. Her blue eyes were incredibly beautiful and deep. Abigail stood up and looked at the stranger, holding her breath, along with her elegant manners. The titled lady harbored such a burning passion. She looked intently at Abigail, saying she had already seen her from afar before, and that now she looked much paler. The girl's face really looked tired, cheerfully declaring that she was perfectly fine. The lady considered this unreliable information and asked how Her Highness felt after all the chaos that had happened, offering her to regain strength with a balanced diet. Squinting her eyes, the lady quickly looked at Kyle and turned to him, holding a book in her hands. She talked about developing a simple menu for Her Highness, which must be handed over to the chef. Kyle asked if she needed, and if it was right now, to fulfill the Countess's errand, to which an affirmative answer was heard, because from that day on Her Highness should always receive only the right dishes. The lady decreed. She turned to Abigail and asked if she had breakfast today. The girl admitted that she hadn't had breakfast today. The menacing gaze of the Countess only meant that a serious conversation would now take place with everyone present. She swore that in Grandonia, even a simple traveler passing by would surely enjoy a good dinner, because these are the basic rules of etiquette for the people of the Empire. The Countess did not leave anyone alone. Abigail finally sat at the table and quietly enjoying her breakfast, having previously listened to a full lecture on posture. The Duke sat opposite, wiped the corners of his lips with a handkerchief, and turned to the girl, saying that he doesn't like people eating slowly, although the Countess had just ordered her to take her time during the meal. Following etiquette, Lachiel laughed and said that in the Emperor's palace, it doesn't matter how the food is eaten, whether you chew 30 times or for an hour, and asked the girl not to do that while she was here so as not to waste time. Then Abigail started chewing even more slowly, and for a longer time. The boy asked her not to eat like a barbarian, and to stand up when she finished eating. The girl asked where he was going, and she cannot stay in a man's room forever. The Duke opened the door and asked her to follow him. He would show her a new room. Poor Kyle backed away down the hallway, hurrying to fulfill the lady's order. The Countess expressed her displeasure with Abigail's posture and considered it inappropriate, reading in an angry tone another serious sermon about not understanding the difference between keeping the back straight and sticking out the butt. Lachiel gave Abigail a look of support. The heroes walked down the red carpet stairs. The girl couldn't keep up with the boy, and mentally hated him for his fast pace. They approached the ivory door. Lachiel stopped and said they had arrived. Upon opening the door, he was the first to enter the room, calmly followed by Abigail. She saw the room, crossed her hands in front of her, and let out a cry of joy when she saw the luxurious furniture, the crystal chandelier, and all the expensive royal interiors. The Empress used this room in her youth. The girl's eyes shone with joy. Having again asked if she could live here, Abigail called this room the most beautiful in the world she had ever seen, appreciating the Empress's decoration. Lachiel asked to call her mother outside of Edilger. He observed the girl's joyful emotions and involuntarily smiled, and promised to let Her Majesty know so that her room would be furnished the same way. From that moment on, Abigail really wanted to stay in this luxurious room, to which Lachiel said it was too early to relax, that there was a lot of work left to do, asking her to be more attentive, disappointing her with his seriousness. He said goodbye and left because he had a lot of work to do for her. At that moment, a loud knock was heard at the door. Lifting his head, the Duke said that someone would certainly come in. Luderick Thornton, the Duke's knight assigned to the guard, appeared at the entrance with a mountain of textbooks. Abigail asked about his relationship with Sir Thornton. The boy turned out to be her younger brother. The book on local goods and the industrial policy of Grantonia was the first to fall into the Duke's hands, who ordered him to read it every day for a week. The girl expressed her displeasure with the new textbooks that appeared in the training, to which Keel promised that everything would end if she did it. He arranged a meeting exactly at 8 and left the future princess alone with a pile of books. Late at night, Abigail fell asleep and saw in her dream that she was running somewhere. From a house surrounded by old trees, crying could be heard in the darkness. Abigail stepped across the threshold of the house and opened the front door. A woman in an old dress, 3 boys and 1 girl were sitting at the table, covering their eyes with their hands and crying. The girl recognized her family. She saw her mother crying and turned to her. One of the boys lowered his hand and, instead of tears, blood poured from his eyes. Abigail jumped back in fright. Creatures with bloodshot eyes. Exactly like her brothers. They stretched out their hands and said she had abandoned them. Already 4 children were approaching her with pale faces and pitiful, calling sister. She backed away, claiming she did all this for the good of her brothers and to get money for her mother's medicine. In the distance, the silhouette of my mother in a simple robe appeared. A huge drop of blood burst from her black eyes. And bottomless, Abigail felt savage fear and unbearable pain in her soul. Despite her mother's fainting spells, she expected her daughter to be by her side. But she fled to the palace due to exhaustion from the pressure in the family, and considered herself no different from a disgusting hypocrite posing as a victim. The children's hands frighteningly approached the girl. Suddenly, a chill ran down her back, and she felt someone's presence nearby. Blood flowed from the girl's lips behind her. Abigail gathered the courage to turn around and look at the stranger. Violetta's ghost approached her. She asked for help and told of intense pain. Fear pierced Abigail's body upon seeing the ghost of the recently deceased princess. She was standing right in front of her in a blood-stained pale pink dress, with tears in her eyes saturated with horror and anxiety. The maid fell to her knees in front of her and burst into tears of despair. She burst into bitter tears and covered her face with her hands. "You are me now?" asked the dead princess. "And if I die, will you replace me?" she said confidently. After this, Abigail lost her balance and fell into a deep black abyss. Voices were heard everywhere, calling her a fake princess and not real, a sister who abandoned her family, and a fraud who should be punished. The abyss of the depths absorbed the girl more and more as she screamed for them to stop and begged for help. At that moment, someone grabbed her hand tightly. Upon opening her eyes, she saw Lucky's worried face in front of her. Abigail wondered if it was already 7 in the morning. Happy that the Duke woke her up. She said she had been studying late into the night, and she didn't even count on waking up at the right time. Important news awaited her. It turned out that her mother demanded confirmation of her death from the palace administrator. The terrible moments of a recent and terrifying nightmare appeared before the girl's eyes. She asked the Duke to simply send her the obituary, to which he reminded her of his desire to delay the news as long as possible. Sooner or later, they would find out anyway, and she didn't want to keep them waiting. She ran away, leaving everything behind, and the time came to let Abigail Dailoa go. But Abigail loved her family, and now the future princess ordered her mother to be sent to her, a personal doctor who would take care of her. She would register her brothers and sisters to get free spots in the academy, find a good husband for a nanny, and she asked the Duke to get them land for properties further away from the capital. It was Abigail's will, a woman who had recently passed away after trusting the Duke. She looked at Lachiel, awaiting his approval. He nodded his head, agreeing to follow her orders. "But there is one more thing I would definitely like to tell you," said the young man. It turned out that the Emperor had sent a letter. He started looking for Abigail much earlier than expected. The Duke warned that she must complete everything in 10 days, and surprised the girl with such news. The action moves to another mansion, where the Emperor of the Granton Empire was outraged by how it happened that the Empress burst in on him immediately after the soldiers returned. Ludwig of Grantonia Morbinerio, Emperor of the Grantonian Empire. He resorted to Pascalia. The lady was in the mood for a serious conversation with the Emperor. She threateningly demanded that the letter be urgently returned to her. Ludwig turned to one of his subjects and brutally ordered Maccas to cut off his legs. Then he turned to Pascalia and asked what was wrong with her letter. She claimed that the time was too short and begged him to allow Abigail to stay longer at Edelgard. After all, the girl needs to recover, to calm down, and is not obliged to stay outside the palace upon hearing this. The Emperor laughed heartily. Frowning, he argued that the imperial daughter could not find peace outside the palace. that it was her home. Pascalia understood that the death of Michael and Violetta happened because of her, and clenched her fists angrily while the emperor discussed the girl's fate. The lady insisted that Abigail stay longer in the palace, and now is not the best time to demand her return. Ludwig roughly grabbed the empress's hand, causing her great pain. Grabbing her hand, he pushed her closer to him and looked threateningly into her eyes, asking what exactly her beloved nephew planned to do, leaving the princess on his estate. Pascalia alleged that the duke simply wanted to protect what remained of Edelgard. The emperor scoffed at the young man's immaturity, that he was only 20 years old. The heroine recalled the recent death of Father Lachiel and asked to take that fact into account. Ludwig was still tightly holding the empress's hand and continued to question her with questions. That is to say, if Duke Edelgar's place is slightly empty, the empire will suffer great losses in this case. And it is good that the nephew understands his position as head of the family. That's why the princess is forced to return to the palace. Louis's cruel nature made the empress tremble and fear the emperor. He suddenly pulled her closer to him and put his hand on her waist. He asked her if the palace was the safest place for the princess, or if he was mistaken. Louis forbade the empress from telling the girl that the duke's estate was safer than life in the imperial palace, painfully squeezing her fragile hand, stating that he is doing everything in the name of safety, and that there is no need to look for excuses. He headed towards the exit, and added that Pascalia had told her nephew not to send her any more letters. The lady obeyed and promised to convey his words to Lachiel. They moved away from each other, ending such a tense conversation. Ludwig left with a slam of the door, and at that moment, Pascalia dreamed of only one thing. One day she would stick a knife in that bastard's throat. The action moves to the Edelgard estate, where Abigail was stunned by the 10-day deadline before leaving. The transformation from maid to princess promised to begin while the girl's height was carefully measured. 3 women rushed around her with tape measures, discussing her height, slender bones, beautiful figure, and shoulders, promising that she would look amazing. A lady presented oriental silk in bright red color and said that this color would be more suitable than other dark shades. Standing in a chemise, Abigail timidly asked permission to get dressed, to which the countess gave a curt refusal. The events that occurred were very unusual and exhausting for the maid. The countess ordered the second lady to do everything exactly as they previously discussed. Abigail sighed in relief that the boring test was over. The lady first presented the dress she liked and asked if Her Highness would like to try it on, declaring that it was a gift and that she would not ask for payment for it. Buttoning up the buttons of a luxurious emerald robe, Abigail put on the dress and looked at herself with admiration in her new royal appearance. Whilst thanking the court lady, the girl's smile shone in such a luxurious outfit. From now on, she would be able to enjoy things that were not available before. Suddenly, a feeling of fear gripped the young woman as she remembered Princess Violetta. She died before her eyes, and Abigail's funeral had already passed. Now she was here, at the Edelgard estate, enjoying something Violet could never enjoy again, and wondering who she was now. Lachiel's voice came from behind her, declaring that she looked much more like a princess now. He asked if this was the dress Baroness Seymour had brought. The heroine turned cheerfully and exclaimed about the most beautiful outfit. Lachiel pointed out that it wasn't bad, and that the Baroness was worth paying, even though it was a gift. Abigail thought that the Baroness had given it out of pity, stating that it was time for her to go study. He said that some sentences need to be reread several times, and that the military writes rather complex books. Having asked if there was anything that was difficult for the Duke, Lachiel pointed out that no one can be perfect in everything. Just try to calculate his strength, asking when Abigail will call him by name. This question puzzled the girl and made her look up embarrassed. He gently took her hand and made her twirl in a slow dance. Abigail did not understand what he meant now. The young man's hand touched the young woman's fingers. He admitted that he had sent more than 20 letters to the emperor, asking him not to take her away so they could spend more time together. Otherwise, they might get into trouble if they weren't careful. The next minute, they looked at each other with confidence, harboring the tenderest feelings. He pulled her closer, and the touch of a strong masculine hand sent chills down the girl's spine. He whispered in her ear that Madame Gills had previously asked him to dance with Abigail, to which she replied that it was indeed worthwhile to surprise people with his strange antics. And she would never have imagined what dancing with this man would be like. Something had been brewing between them for a long time, and now it moved their kind hearts. A strange feeling overwhelmed Abigail in that second. Spinning in a dance with Lachiel, Abigail and the Baroness were in the room. She was combing the girl's hair and talking about how dark colors really didn't suit her face. The Baroness presented and opened a box containing a precious necklace. Elegant and expensive, this pendant belonged to Her Majesty, Empress Pascalia, who, even before marriage, the emperor personally commissioned the dwarves from the western province. When she was his beloved, the girl asked if she would now have to wear such important clothes, to which the countess replied that the empress did not consider this a problem. A precious necklace was now on Abigail's neck, which she had never been able to see from afar before. The preparations were completed, and the new princess was ready to go out into the world. The countess and the baroness obediently left the room and accompanied Abigail to her new life. For the first time this month, she left the duke's estate. And now everything was very different from how she was dragged down the emergency stairs. Now the baroness and the countess, in whom the empress herself trusts, are nearby. And not only them, the only Duke of Grantonia was also on this list. Lachiel himself, the owner of Edelgard, is also waiting for her. The young man extended his hand to the young woman, admiring her transformation. She offered her hand to my lord like a true royalty, and it seems that she has become a completely different person than she was before. The carriage with horses was provided. The maid's life had taken a complete turn, and now she was standing near a luxurious carriage in a royal dress. Lachiel politely offered her his hand to help her. The young man's gaze was filled with respect and reverence. A kind of warm magic of tender feelings reigned between them, which helped them face all difficulties. The action moves to the estate. A loud knock was heard at the door, and on the threshold appeared a blonde girl in a pink dress. The third princess and Lovela of Grantonia, more Cabderinger, to which she immediately received a wave of criticism because, regardless of her status, she still could not run around the palace and enter through closed doors so recklessly. The first Empress Beatrice of Cabderinger glared menacingly at the lady, dissatisfied with her pretentious behavior. When calling her mother, the girl noticed that now is not the right time to say bad words. The rumor about the arrival of Pascalia's daughter was already spreading throughout the estate, and Lovela shouted indignantly at the news of her half-sister. The first Prince Wilkes of Gratonia, more Cabderinger, reported that the princess was 18 years old. The brother carefully kissed the blonde and hurried to calm her down. She was indignant at the arrival of the princess, not believing Lachiel's words about the lack of inferiority and the girl's limited mind. Ilobla did not like the fact that her brother called the princess by her first name, to which he smiled and replied about their relationship, because she was his sister. The lady filled with anger and rage, shouting that grandfather had already sent a group of mercenaries to kill this idiot. The hero smiled and said he was against this from the beginning. The girl's hysteria intensified, and accusations poured from her lips. Vilkius never wished death upon the Caterginer, and announced the simple return of the princess to the palace. Their mother asked the brother and the sister to stop fighting immediately, covering her mouth with a fan. The death of the second prince was originally planned by His Majesty, and Marcio only followed his orders. Vilcius thought that, at the moment of his death, Mikhail was not just a prince, but a crown prince. Beatrice suspected the evil plans of Duke Laquil, hiding the pain of losing her father deep in her heart. Who discovered the murderers? And opened fire, hiding her feelings. It is strictly forbidden to talk about him under any circumstances, so as not to touch upon the direct connection with the princess's illness in conversations. The duke and the princess were greeted by their subjects and asked them to proceed to the room on the right. It was known what this clever duke had planned for the legitimate successor to the throne. But his uncle and Michael were dead, and his mother would follow the emperor. Beatrice was sure that the princess was a man with a hidden sharp dagger. Lachiel whispered to Abigail that he would be waiting for her inside, ready to leave her in peace. The girl was preparing for any unpleasant outcome of the events, but the duke's support gave her strength. Beatrice convinced Wilkius that he was the only candidate for the role of emperor, eliminating the second prince and former Duke Edelgard. The emperor made the decision from the hands of the Caterginers. He ordered the young man to remember this. The young man had no intention of becoming an emperor who would kill his brothers with his own hands. But he intended to take the place of the crown prince in another way. The subject was in a hurry to open the door for the maid princess, who was standing behind her ignorantly, with her arms crossed in front of her. She prepared for a serious meeting with royalty. The scale of what was happening was significantly different, and urged with its force. Laquil expected anything from the imperial family. On the way in the carriage, the duke noticed that the aunt had begun to sharpen the young woman's sword. He asked to be told about the necklace that Agnes gave the girl. She remembered how the countess convinced her that Pascalia herself wanted this. The emperor, according to her, should have seen exactly this necklace. The duke noted that most likely the aunt was trying to destroy it to relieve her soul, but certainly could not ignore the motive, and should remember the love story between the empress and the emperor in the past. Pascalia remained silent even in front of Mikkel, whom she loved so much during her life. Abigail entered the office and looked at the map, wondering out loud where her family was. Ludwig was behind her, surprised by the girl's knowledge of geography. His attitude seemed extremely severe. The girl tried to hold on and not show fear to the high official. The threatening appearance of Emperor Louis made the girl tremble. She curtsied as a greeting, placing her hand on her chest and holding the hem of her blue dress. It seemed to her that she could not breathe at all, and she felt enormous pressure, trying to make sure that the emperor had seen his daughter only once when she was a child, and he should not have suspected a deception by imprisoning his baby for 13 years in a castle. 13 years of prison, and then the sudden death of her uncle and her brother, with whom she was inseparable in childhood. The girl could not be submissive, but she also could not be afraid. How to behave without showing hatred towards this adult man? Now he, the formidable emperor, and she, the deceptive maiden princess, were facing each other. Ludwig's silence made the girl feel extremely uncomfortable. The emperor crossed his arms and asked to answer the previously stated question. She replied that the geographical map seemed magical, and that she was simply fascinated by it, but that she knew absolutely nothing about geography. The emperor asked her if she knew the lands she was currently in, to which the young woman frantically tried to imagine a map in her memory and remember the location. She studied maps with Kyle, but now she couldn't remember half of it. The closest Granton territory to this place was Verts, a wealthy family from Verts, homeland of Viscount Gilmont, who hired workers from the borders of Carolinga as underpaid labor for the factories, where a terrible fire then occurred, killing 85 people. She replied that this was the territory of the Seops of the Carolingian kingdom, and bowed her head in respect and reverence before the emperor. The emperor's gaze enveloped the girl. He asked the age of his fake daughter and asked her to raise her head. It seems the day has come for Pascalia to do something out of the ordinary, she pointed out. The girl remembered the kind eyes of the empress. What happened next was an unpredictable action on the part of the emperor, grabbing the girl by the necklace The emperor, angry, asked her what her mother said while handing over the jewelry. This pendant was made especially for the empress by the ninth prince, when she was approximately Abigail's age. And the emperor was stupid and pathetic. The necklace clearly meant something to him, provoking such angry emotions. Ludwig grabbed the girl's necklace and pulled her closer to him, saying that Abigail is exactly like Pascalia and therefore repulsive, asking her to tell her mother that half of the plan was a success and that he would compensate for 13 years of her life, no matter what it cost him. Closing the door, he left, leaving Abigail alone with thoughts about what had happened and about her new destiny as a lady of imperial blood. Pascalia knew Ludwig's character very well, so she gave her necklace to the princess in the hope that only he could protect Violetta from this madman. She recalled the moments when they were united by a loving relationship, and Ludwig, not yet caught by the spell of power, hugged her and promised to be the happiest. One morning, concluding his sweet speeches, he said important words that would change both their lives in the future. He gave the lady this very precious necklace as a token of great love and sincere intentions, and said that they would be truly happy, but that this would only happen under one condition. His smile charmed Pascalia, and at that moment, the enamored woman could not recognize Ludwig's true nature. Then he invited her, Pascalia of Edelgard, to marry him, something the girl had long desired. But she was very afraid of it, all because even then, something had already changed in their relationship, and it was no longer the same as before. She was now well aware of the responsibility to help this madman once gain the throne of Edelgard. Louis was the ninth prince, who never stood out and whom no one looked at twice. None of the royal people saw him on the imperial throne, since the young man had no governing skills. But he was crowned by Pascalia, who now regretted the power, the title and recognition she had granted him among the nobility. Lachiel and the princess walked down the castle hallway after meeting Ludwig. The girl was noticeably in a hurry. The duke asked why they were walking so fast, but the young woman expressed an insistent desire to immediately be in the empress's palace. She remembered the emperor's words about compensating for her 13 years of life, and often reflected on his words. Is this what he should tell his daughter? Having imprisoned her in a castle, and being the cause of the princess's near death. She was angry and indignant that the real princess was no longer alive solely because of the treacherous Ludwig. Her fast pace was stopped by the duke, grabbing her hand and asking her to stop immediately. He saw fresh, bright purple scratches on the girl's neck that were not there before meeting the emperor. The young man stopped and began to ask what happened while she was in the room with Ludwig. Abigail looked sadly into the duke's eyes, understanding all his experiences and mixed feelings. He must have looked at her and seen the crown prince, an ex-duke of Edelgard, behind her dead, not intending to focus attention on what had happened. She insisted that there was nothing wrong, and asked to go to the empress's palace and talk there. The duke seemed quite tense at that moment, but he did not contradict the young woman. The conversation was interrupted by two men slowly approaching them, to which Lachiel sighed dejectedly. The young man on the right made a more favorable impression, but solely with his gallant smile. Abigail felt uncomfortable and complained to the duke that the second man in the blue suit on the right was smiling creepily. Lachiel noticed the princess's attentive gaze and breathed slowly again. The duke introduced the girl to them. To those two on the right, a stupid snake that does not know cunning, and on the left, an ambitious young man, and without talent, who is not very good in the light. But the other is simply even more terrible. According to the color of your beautiful hair. Just like the emperor's, you must be Princess Violetta, said one of the strangers, pronouncing the girl's name so naturally. She asked with a friendly smile if they had met before. One of the young men in the white suit exclaimed, and immediately hurried to introduce himself, apologizing for the late introduction. He bowed and said that Veron, the palace minister, was the empress's older brother, and the uncle of the fourth prince. The princess looked at the second stranger and also asked him to introduce himself. He put his hand on his chest and noted that he had the great honor of personally meeting the fifth princess, introducing himself as secretary and financial assistant, the firstborn of the Caterguiner Galwa of Caterguiner. Galwa of Caterguiner, firstborn Marcus Caterguiner, older brother of the first empress, as well as uncle of the prince and the third princess. The murderer of the late Duke Edelgard had another title, and Princess Violetta. The girl trembled with fear, as the day of Violetta's death was still as bright as if it had all happened yesterday. But she tried not to show emotions, looking perfect and striving to smile as if the terrible events had not happened. One of them asked how the princess ended up together. And the Duke? The girl looked away towards Lachiel, awaiting his reaction, as she had not yet learned to respond with such quickness and skill. In front of them were two men who wanted to know what the couple was doing in the hall corridor. Lachiel replied confidently that this was the first time in his memory that such a strange event had happened, squeezing the princess's shoulder. He had no idea what game the Duke was playing again, and what he was planning this time. But he quickly stopped worrying and calmed down because she was not alone, but under the reliable protection of the young man who saved her life. Galwa replied that their carriages ended up next to each other in the imperial palace by chance, and that both were going to the emperor to present a periodic report. He quickly bypassed his character and then turned to the Duke with the question of why it was so difficult to find him in the palace. The palace minister sarcastically asked not to be so strict. After all, it had only been 2 months since he became Duke, and had barely reached adulthood. Unlike Sir Caterginner, who, being a loyal bureaucrat, spent decades doing nothing, the princess's gaze, little by little, became threatening with ignorance and dislike towards their two new acquaintances. In his speech, one of them pointed out how the Duke is trying to fill the void left by the deceased Duke, and the life of a bureaucrat is worth much less to him. So seeing him in the palace is, of course, difficult. The girl thought he was trying to provoke Lachiel, who, unlike his predecessor, was now young and too sarcastic about suspicions regarding the emperor and his father, considering them the reason for his imprisonment in the duchy. But his words, doubting the right to inheritance and ridiculing him, also offended Caterginner. The young man with the gallant smile turned out to be, surprisingly, a very repulsive person. The Duke smiled, clearly preparing to reject such ignorant behavior from his interlocutors. The princess pulled herself together, felt secure, and now intended to continue the conversation herself. She pointed out that Sir Caterginner, without having really done anything, had been serving faithfully for several decades. She considered this excellent and declared the negligent statement of one of his young men. Galwa asked why the girl thought so. Frowning, the heroine replied that the longevity of the Marquis' father is a real blessing for children. The princess took the Duke by the arm and called him her older cousin, who recently replaced her uncle in office. The former maid Abigail was already excellent at playing the role of Princess Violetta. She laughed and said that the long life of Sir Caterginner made everyone jealous of the young Caterginner, and her cousin thought the same. And there is no greater happiness in the world than the long life and good health of a father, a brother or a sister. Veron found nothing to answer her, and only agreed, admitting that he once truly envied the Caterginners upon hearing the princess's words. The princess took the Duke's arm with both hands and offered to leave such pleasant company, finally stating that they promised their mother that she would visit her today without fail. Her smile meant a great victory over her fears, and a feeling of justice invaded her more and more. Veron clenched his teeth and slowly watched the sweetest imperial couple with a malicious gaze, while Hallows looked arrogantly at the Duke and Princess Violetta, who were leaving. On the street, the noise of the wheels of a golden carriage slowly leaving the luxurious mansion could be heard. Lachiel hurried to share how at first he thought the princess was helping Galwa, but at the same time praised Veron. The girl frowned and stated how unhappy she was with this man, enthusiastically dancing after her father's death. When her father died, he seemed to be waiting precisely for this, and then quickly demolished and rebuilt the entire family palace. Verona's predecessor was a brilliant personality. Unlike his son, there must have been a conflict here. Lackwill continued that dancing for 3 years after his father's death was not enough for this idiot. So he danced mortally again. The position of palace minister that he now holds was granted thanks to this dance. The girl did not understand what he was talking about and asked the Duke to tell her the situation in more detail. It turned out that a month ago, the emperor convened a secret council and got drunk in the government building. All high-ranking officials were present at the council, and royalty always trying to please the emperor. When the emperor is too drunk, he will grant the desired position to anyone who climbs onto the Lontmian and dance. Lontmian referred to a secret meeting created about 400 years ago when the Brunsell royal family, having married the empress, handed over the round table to the empire as a wedding gift. That is, the table was a symbol of secret meetings for over 400 years. Among the nobility of the secret assembly, there is no one who dares to climb onto the table. No one would want to possess such a dangerous position, granted only as a joke. But this mad Viren, who had completely lost his mind, climbed onto the Lontmian table and danced happily, while the crazy emperor enjoyed the crazy spectacle. Others were shocked by what they saw. It turned out that he did not like that Veron was less privileged than the emperor's older cousin, and he gave the position of palace minister to Veron, which previously belonged to the emperor's older cousin, Benario Beek. Lachiel noticed that this idiot desperately wanted to make his nephew emperor, although if he wanted to overcome Michael's death, he should first take the place of the young Katarjiner. Call Veron a historical figure who, for the first time in the history of Grantonia, obtained a leadership position thanks to a good dance. The girl said everyone was crazy, considering that this was a place where someone could easily lose their ministerial post because of a drunkard dancing on a 400-year-old noble table. Lachiel believed that the emperor was not such a crazy fool, and pointed out that Benario Beek was still responsible for managing half of the palace. In his opinion, Veron was a terribly pitiable person, probably still unaware of his vile nature. Veron believes that he ousted Benario Beek and replaced him as palace minister, but he never realized that this was the emperor's plan. To appease the offended Beek, he created a new position called guardian, which allowed him to attend the private council and have the advantage of observing the nobility. Abigail now understood that the emperor was a thoughtful person and deceptive, capable of any abomination. In the first place, the emperor knew that he wanted to take Venario's place, so he writhed as if on a griddle and, if anything happened, he could speak in court against Veron. The emperor truly acted like a madman, and all the people were just toys in his hands. He controlled them like puppets solely to achieve his own selfish goals. The princess asked him if he had planned everything from the beginning. To this, Lachiel affirmatively indicated that Veron was used to make the situation look credible. Veron was fooled and Benario Bajik was the only one to win. And there was one who laughed at everyone. The emperor controlled all the strings, playfully toying with people's living destinies. Even the position of imperial palace minister was an attraction for the emperor, who ended up handing over power to his trustworthy cousin, and thus obtained the means to appoint nobles called interventors. In the end, all that remained was the emperor's interest in how Veron's waterfront would turn out. The girl was surprised that no one suspected anything yet. But no one would have thought of it. Lachiel himself admitted that he thought of the emperor's madness. But I quickly understood everything when I saw how illiterate they managed the castle. And I realized that something was definitely wrong. No one would dare contradict the emperor when appointing his cousin, who had been minister for 20 years, as compensation for a lower position. The minister, who perfectly fulfilled his duties, was expelled by the traveling emperor. And the stupid, drunk Veron. Everyone else just watched as Veron the idiot, sitting in the magnificent minister's chair, was about to destroy a historically important family. In the palace where the state administration was located, there were practically no problems. Because Benario Bayek was still the head, most people did not speak seriously and thought about the insignificance of the new position, not realizing that, in this way, they were tightening the noose around their necks even more. No one wanted to be the first to express a problem and become a victim of the director, when there is nothing wrong with that. Varendale will lead 3 queens and 4 princes to face their family curse in the imperial family, so that those destined to be below do not start destroying each other prematurely, and were created correctly. Halo Scattergener was still extraordinarily handsome at 70 years old. Therefore, the chances of him stumbling were higher here. The Duke believed. The princess lowered her head and silently listened to the young man's interesting story. Moreover, Galway's skills were never inferior to his father's. He skillfully handled people and was always better than him in every way. Therefore, I am sure that the murder of his father and Mikhail was the work of Marcus. But who hired the assassins for her was precisely this person. Laquille did not know that, on that fateful night, he would go to Princess Violeta's castle and start a fire. The coachman stopped the horses, and the carriage stopped with a squeak near the indicated place. The Duke opened the door, protecting the girl behind him, and was the first to get out of the carriage. Looking around, the princess continued the conversation about Eloi, asking if he was a more carefree person. The young man nodded his head and asked her to be more careful with him than with Marcus. He extended his hand to the girl to help her out of the carriage, noting that Halewa was much easier to remember than Marcus. Abigail was somewhat confused by the new acquaintances and the rapidly developing events in her new life. She smiled calmly and looked confidently at the Duke. By asking why his voice sounded so confident, she offered him her hand and slowly stepped out of the carriage. They crossed the estate gates together, where they were greeted by the court lackey. The princess was sure they had arrived at the Empress's castle, and was very surprised not to see it in front of her. She realized that they were not near the Empress's palace now, but in a completely different place, and unknown to her. The Duke and the girl enthusiastically examined the palace, and Lachiel replied that this was his castle now. We should not go to the Empress's palace, she asked confusedly, not understanding what was happening. Lachiel stepped forward and announced that the Empress would stay with the princess, and that there was no need to go to her now. Impressive views of the adjacent park with huge trees opened up before the girl. And fountains. Laquille asked her if she liked the look of the palace, since he had to completely change everything here. The princess covered her mouth with her hand and asked how much money was spent on such a large-scale transformation, to which Laquille replied that she was crazy. He, of course, resorted to the imperial family for expenses, and even called the dwarves for such a matter. In fact, she could have simply entered the castle inherited from Migil. But before she could finish her thought, the door opened with a creak. An excited Pascalia appeared on the threshold, with the royal servants lined up behind her. This man seemed to want the castle to remain intact. The Duke suddenly spoke. Pascalia, without thinking twice, ran towards the girl's neck, hugging her happily and repeating Violeta's name. With all her maternal warmth, she hugged her new daughter, gently squeezing her in her arms. The Empress burst into tears and called the princess by her name for a long time, as if they hadn't seen each other in many years. At that moment, Abigail remembered how Pascalia promised that she would soon become her true daughter. The girl clung to the Empress with confidence and love, lamenting the bitter loss and wanting to help. In her, Pascalia saw her little Violeta, who once also rushed to hug her mother. But now the Empress is faced with an adult Violeta, 18 years old, whom she has never seen. Abigail remembered her mother, her smile, and her kind eyes, and realized how much she missed her family. The Duke, the princess, and Pascalia entered a huge castle with expensive marble floors. Pascalia said she heard from Lachiel how the princess liked her room in the last castle. Indeed, the girl was delighted with the decoration and beauty of the previous royal bedroom. It turned out that the Duke asked the Empress to decorate this room in the same way the young woman would live in it in the future. The huge oak doors of the entrance opened, and the three followed her in anticipation. The girl, who had never lived in luxury for a long time before, opened her mouth in surprise and could not believe what she saw. She thought the room was even more beautiful than the one she had lived in at the Edelgard mansion. Every detail, color, and interior was thought out to the smallest detail by the Empress, who definitely managed to impress the young woman. Pascalia chose everything herself: curtains, furniture, and even the slippers the young princess would wear. Having put all her maternal care into the design of the room where Violetta will live in the future. This awakened trembling feelings in both ladies. But something was wrong, because Lachiel said that he was decorating the room, and that he did everything himself. To which Pascalia confidently stated that the man certainly could not do anything sensible in such a matter. He only chose what kind of wood to use, and how to decorate the exterior walls. Lachiel said with a smile that he was standing right in front of the Empress, and how she could speak like that. To which the lady replied that she had already seen enough of him during all this time, and that contemplation would soon make her feel bad, calling this discrimination. The young man sat down on a chair, hinting that the Empress didn't even greet him. And how dare she sit down before the new owner of the room did? That is, the princess. With a skillful move, he sat the girl next to him, making her feel embarrassed and a little nervous. The girl said the young man was scared, to which he replied that the Empress was still standing. And how dare they sit down without her permission? The princess frowned and stated that the Duke deliberately forced her to do this, and that he was tired of such antics. Pascalia watched with a smile as the young people tenderly argued among themselves, finding out who was to blame, and who definitely needed to be punished as a joke, hinting that the Duke really did not receive many positive qualities and goodwill from his father. In a second, the Empress's face visibly darkened, and the horror that appeared in her eyes meant that something was wrong. On the princess's neck were bruises from a recent meeting with the Emperor, which clearly indicates rude behavior. Pascalia got goosebumps and ran towards the girl sitting on the chair with cries of despair. In panic, the lady, with trembling hands, began to examine the young woman's neck, trying to examine the scratches that had appeared out of nowhere. She immediately realized that this was Ludwig's doing, and shouted if he really was trying to kill her in person. Abigail wanted to reassure the woman, claiming that it was nothing and that the Emperor was not trying to harm her. She reported that the neck was like that because of the necklace that cut the skin and left bruises as Pascalia examined the cuts. The girl recounted exactly what happened when the man took off the jewelry, and asked what the Empress meant. "Give me this particular necklace." Pascalia became furious when she heard that Ludwig dared to shout at the girl, and clearly lost control of himself at that moment. The girl described exactly the situation that occurred during the final meeting with Ludwig in the castle. She clarified that Ludwig asked her age, and said Pascalia's name with a very strange expression on his face. The Empress listened carefully to the story, and found Ludwig's behavior extremely repulsive. But there was one last thing in his speeches, words she asked to make sure to convey to the Empress. He said that since half of the Empress's plan had succeeded, he would at all costs return the last 13 years of her life. Lachiel reached into his pocket and took out a piece of paper that was apparently the beginning of Ludwig's payments. He slowly handed the folded piece of paper to the girl. The princess took it and prepared to read the content. The letter stated that in 4 days, a banquet would be held in honor of the 5th princess. That is, in her honor. Lachiel asked to read the imperial banquet speech. The banquet venue is Vladimiro. Read the princess, a rather famous place for the privileged. Vladimiro was a difficult place, not for everyone. Not even for those of imperial blood. They were allowed to enter its huge hall. Solemn coronation ceremonies took place there. Weddings, name days, and funerals of the emperor. This place is symbolic, and therefore has very strict rules of use. Once an emperor even lost his throne, because he committed a crime by organizing a private celebration for the birth of his daughter. His Majesty is really going to hold a banquet there, thus confirming the words about compensation for many years of life in captivity. Upon hearing this news, Pascalia warned that the next few days would be quite noisy in imperial circles. The farther the better, observed the Duke, surprised how the emperor chose Vladimiro for the banquet. Everyone was stunned by the new upcoming event, while the princess noticeably began to get nervous. She felt dizzy from the enormity of what was happening. She seemed incapable of keeping up so fast. Bright sun rays pierced through the windows of the empress's castle. While all the courtiers were busy returning the princess, the empress's main lady-in-waiting was surrounded by 3 young girls and asked permission to introduce the new ladies-in-waiting, who from now on would serve the new Violetta. It was strange for the girl that she now had personal maids. And not 1, but 3, because until recently she herself had been a maid. The first lady-in-waiting was an 18-year-old girl, Count Mayer's first daughter, Malja Mayer. Her family founded the first bank in the empire, and they were highborn knights, owners of the enormous Mayer Bank. The next was Viscount Nathan's daughter, named Diana, who arrived here and expressed her wish to be the princess's lady-in-waiting for the rest of her life. Viscount Nathan's family, the most famous millionaire in the capital. It was even more important than the families of the second and third count together. The princess thought that the lifelong desire to be a lady-in-waiting seemed strange, given the status of such a family. The last on the list, but not least important, she introduced herself as the daughter of Count Mondrial. Louis Mondrial. The House of Mondrial is one of the 11 families of the Imperial Council, as well as the Mayer family, known as a military family that, along with the House of the Marquis of Clarence, holds the position of Commander-in-Chief of the capital's defensive corps. The princess did not expect to see girls from famous families in front of her, and she thought there would be enough surprises for today. She could not understand how girls from families with incredible backgrounds could become ladies-in-waiting, let alone these 3 specifically standing in front of her. The head lady-in-waiting announced tomorrow's grand welcoming breakfast for the princess, which requires special preparation, so it would be time to go to bed early, which will allow her to talk to her new charges. The girls stood in front of the princess and smiled welcomingly, ready to talk. There was a moment of silence because the princess did not know what to say to them, for she was always alone with Violetta. And due to the family's bankruptcy, she never debuted in high society, not even having friends. Having found the safest topic of dialogue, she decided to find out how the girls ended up taking on the role of ladies-in-waiting. Diana dared to speak first, asking them to drop the familiarity to quickly get closer to each other. Diana was older than the other girls, so the princess probably felt a warm aura, like that of an older sister. Her story began when she graduated from Zippen Academy a year ago and dreamed of continuing her studies at Ernst to get a degree. Upon returning home, the girl was faced with sudden news. She was engaged to someone without knowledge or consent. One of the ladies-in-waiting asked if her fiancé was handsome, but she refused. During the conversation, it turned out that the young man was the nephew of Marquis Bonervis, from a rather famous family. In reality, he turned out to be a stupid young man, incompetent, always a party-goer, and unattractive who had no future. And Diana was careful not to connect her life with someone like that, said the girl filled with rage. Therefore, she chose the path where she was destined to be a lady-in-waiting in the imperial palace for life in order not to get married. In the end, it turned out that she committed this act secretly from her father, who naturally would not have allowed it. Diana suggested that perhaps her father had already heard rumors about this and was a little scared. The next lady-in-waiting came by order of Dad, because Dad's words must be obeyed. Milia began her story with a story about competition with her younger brother for the right to inherit. That's why she now listens to her dad in everything to look good in his eyes. The girls started talking about their younger brother, who was only 23 months old. In the end, it turned out that Miley had already spent 15 years preparing for the position of heiress, and lived exclusively for this, even reading Haven's finance theories 18 times. But due to the fact that the child was born a boy, her candidacy is now in jeopardy. She believed everything was in perfect order because she was confident in victory over the family inheritance. The third lady-in-waiting said she had received a letter from Duke Edelgard himself. And that's how she ended up here. The letter said that upon coming to this place, she could benefit, gain fortune, and unlimited opportunities. And she was incredibly captivated by Lachiel's letter. The princess assumed that Kyle was writing the letter, while Luisa talked about a fight with her father because he didn't allow her to leave. So she got into a bad mood and got angry in the main office, starting a week-long hunger strike to obtain her father's blessing. Luisa took the princess's hands and felt that everything seemed as if the calling of a lady-in-waiting was a real destiny for her. The other two ladies-in-waiting considered this not a destiny at all, but the choice of an easy path to achieve their goals. But Luisa was indignant and loudly expressed her opinion about the truth of royal destiny. The princess paid no attention to their disputes and was simply glad to communicate with girls her age for the first time. She experienced pleasant emotions communicating with her peers and considered the conversation a quite fun activity. The action takes place in the Empress's palace. The princess used to be accompanied by her subjects, but this time she dismissed the servants, expressing her desire to go further. The dining room was located between spacious corridors, and it was a dining room only for the emperor's descendants. The heroine approached the door and felt pressure. Her soul did not feel very well, and the door seemed like the entrance to hell from children's book illustrations. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice was heard behind her, which caused the girl to be frightened by the surprise and shudder. A stranger in a light blue suit said that her eyes were exactly like Mikkel's. The heroine looked silently at the stranger's face and waited for his future actions. It was not for nothing that he was standing here now. A young man with striking blonde hair and blue eyes greeted the girl. The boy's voice was soft, and he himself was a knight, and such a well-trained soldier that Abigail didn't even sense his presence nearby. It was Vilquius. He asked her if she was Violetta, and noted the surprising similarity of his eye color to Mikkel's. The princess timidly asked if he was the first prince. To this, he affirmed that there was no need to be so cold on the day of their first meeting. She knew that in front of her was His Highness Vilquius of Grandonia Moray Cardinger, the first prince, House of Marquis of Cardinger, main figure behind the death of the second Prince Michael, and Duke Edelgard, as well as Princess Violetta, the prince's sister, eager for Violetta's death. She wanted the girl to tremble with fear if her brother was kind to her. The boy's cold gaze meant only one thing. The deceptive acting with her participation continued. He smiled sarcastically and invited Abigail to call him brother, as real siblings do. The girl assumed Vilquius's insidious plans if he were a normal brother. He would not have killed his younger brother, but she agreed to participate in a deceptive play by calling him her brother. The prince frowned, clearly did not expect such a quick agreement. Trying to gain confidence, the young man assured that Violetta could now live in peace. The girl, who knew all the bloody facts and secrets committed by her family, remained polite and calm. How can he be so confident about inheriting the imperial throne and have the right to speak to the princess like that, even though it is he who is to blame for someone losing their loved ones? He did not wait for the lady's permission, but took her hand and brought it closer. Smiling maliciously, Abigail asked why he was doing this, to which he received the answer that he supposedly only wanted to accompany her, claiming that a brother is allowed to accompany his little sister to such an important event. Vilkius turned out to be a more unscrupulous person, and selfish than his kind soul, and sincere hoped. The courtier reported to the guests that the first Prince Vilcius would now enter the hall, and the fifth Princess Violetta. Upon hearing this, Vilcius's mother threw a threatening look at the door, with the confidence that everything was going according to the insidious plan. The guests sat down at the hall table, awaiting the start of the celebration and the appearance of the fifth princess. It turned out that His Majesty the Emperor would not be present at today's breakfast. Vilcius quickly realized and decided to take his place and introduce Violetta to the family by asking Pascalia for permission. The lady, without any resistance, gave the prince's wishes the green light. She began to meet an elegantly featured woman sitting next to Pascalia, who was the first queen named Beatrice. The seat next to the first queen belongs to Her Majesty, the second Queen Milna, then to Her Majesty, the third Queen Catherine, and last but not least, Her Majesty the fourth Queen Alois, who nodded her head in greeting. Princess Siderna, who was married after winning the war against the Kingdom of Siderna, was the fourth queen, nicknamed the Captive of Siderna. The prince continued to introduce the princess to those present. Siblings were next in line. He pointed to the empty seat to the emperor's left, where His Highness Crown Prince Michael should be located. The empty seat next to it was Prince Vilcius's seat. Then, pointing to the blonde girl, he introduced the third princess, Ilivella, and called her older sister. Then came the son of the third queen, the fourth Prince Kilian, 19 years old, the older brother, whose face showed total disinterest in what was happening. The third princess is very similar to her mother, while the fourth child doesn't seem to care at all. Vilkius, after introducing the guests, showed the seat of the fifth princess next to the youngest sixth prince, Ione. Violetta smiled upon seeing the cute baby, who was only 8 years old. The prince clearly shared the girl's feelings and decided that now was the best time to put a smile on her face. Empress Pascalia interrupted the young man's fun, considering his behavior too rude for the moment. Perhaps you have already forgot the reason why my son, the second prince, sat to the emperor's left hand, said the lady in a serious tone. Vilkius realized he had gone too far with his speech, and immediately asked forgiveness for the words he said. Without thinking about the consequences, and placing his hand on his chest as a sign of respect, he hurried to apologize to the fifth Princess Violetta. Beatrice observed her son's behavior, not wanting to account for his actions. The princess has found out that Michael and she share the same blood as His Majesty, and that is why Queen Beatrice is now furious. But in fact, the son of Empress Pascalia and Beatrice's son had completely different pedigrees. Queen Milna smiled and asked those present why the emperor did not attend the first dinner with his daughter. Beatrice replied that she did not know, but that she had heard that the princess's first evening would be held in Vladimiro, which caused shock in her interlocutor with such news. Abigail knew this would provoke a public outcry, but she was sure that Violetta deserved such compensation. Beatrice continued that any member of the nobility living according to the laws would definitely resist, since they would not be able to understand the emperor's feelings towards his daughter. And it didn't matter how much it would hurt the fifth princess. Abigail got used to the role of Princess Violetta, and sweetly stated that it would be a great honor for her to be present in Vladimiro. Pascalia was proud of Violetta's behavior, and was sincerely happy that the honor and her daughter's name lived on, although in a different incarnation. The princess looked at those present, perfectly sensing who they were playing. The imperial family sat at the table in front of her, and from now on she will have to wear a mask like them, just to survive in this royal place full of deceit, envy, and unpleasant people in the name of Princess Violetta and kindness. Lewis's lady-in-waiting turned towards the door and asked who the handsome man standing there was. since it seemed to her that he was the son of the fallen family. The new Violetta wanted to follow the conversation and recognize the young man's attractive appearance. If Milia had seen him, she would definitely have liked him. Luisa prepared to show off all her feminine charm and asked the princess if she looked pretty. Before she had time to finish speaking, the lady-in-waiting hurried to conquer the next stranger. Luisa, apparently, could be interested indiscriminately in almost any attractive young man. If she runs after everyone like this, she will ruin her entire hairstyle, said the second lady-in-waiting, amusing the princess. Somehow the breakfast was already over. Abigail was dizzy from the oppressive atmosphere, where in the end she didn't have time to eat. The girl modestly asked the lady-in-waiting to show her the library located nearby. On shelves reaching the ceiling, there was a variety of books in expensive velvets and other bindings. The library was so charming that she couldn't even imagine such luxury. This was a completely different level compared to the town library she attended when she was a maid, and immediately asked Diana to find the book she needed. Her voice sounded imperious, like Lachiel's. The girl laughed and now politely asked the lady-in-waiting to recommend a book. She asked for something useful, industrial strategies for local products, or the geography of the Eastern and Western continents, but Diana was surprised by this choice. The lady-in-waiting considered this good-humored. She promised to collect a couple of books and advised the girl to look at the library a little. She was surprised, thinking how her behavior started to resemble Lachiel's, who gives instructions to everyone. And she was really used to the fact that even after arriving here, where there is no homework, she still studies. But no, the young woman came here only for fun. And she will not look for boring educational books and abstruse ones. A shelf full of books caught her attention, and one of them definitely interested the princess more than the others. It was about a forbidden book called Lady de Bourrier, a story about the personal life of a free protagonist that became quite controversial due to the debate about whether the book could be considered literary or pornographic. She had heard a lot about the story and intended to take the book, but she could not reach that high with her hand. Abigail thought she could call a librarian to help her get it, but then decided it was too embarrassing. So she had to get the book herself, look at it quickly, and put it back. Suddenly, someone approached the book, as if he were taller, and took a red-bound edition from the shelf. The young man warned in a low voice, and quietly, that taking a book like this was a little dangerous. Holding the long-awaited story in his hands in front of the princess, the stranger's face was not like other members of royalty. There was something kind about him, different from imperial society. For a minute, the princess forgot where she was now, and was overwhelmed by pleasant feelings and warm ones. She kept standing there with her mouth open, without answering anything, so the boy saw fit to ask her if there was something on her face that the princess had been staring at for so long. The young woman came to her senses and reported the incredibly sweet smile of the stranger standing in front of her. She did not expect to hear such frank words, so she decided to ask again and see if she had heard correctly. Then the girl realized what she had just said, and realizing the meaning of her words, which she hadn't even thought about before uttering them, now she felt terribly embarrassed. The young man remained silent and looked into the princess's kind eyes, which for some reason were becoming sweeter every second. The girl felt very embarrassed, realizing she had been staring at the boy for quite some time, and lowered her head, trying to look away from his beautiful face. But what caused even greater embarrassment was the fact that he held a love story in his hands, which she was approaching and wanted to get so that no one would find out. It didn't occur to her anything better than to angrily snatch the book from his hands and run where her eyes were looking. The young man could not let the moment pass and not apologize for his action, so he tried to stop the angry young woman. He managed to grab her hand before she tried to run away and quickly hide from the excitement. The heroine stopped and asked him to let go of her hand, while the young man held her loosely and tried to apologize for his ignorance. Abigail was determined to listen to the unknown young man's speech, which interested her so much because of his appearance and behavior. He gently released the girl's hand and said he would like to know her name. At that moment, she was so confused that her only wish was for this particular young man never to know a single thing about her. That she has this vulgar book in her hands. And forbidden one. That's why the girl quickly turned around and hurried to run forward, away from unexpected feelings and emotions. She stopped in front of the library door, holding the story tightly, and watched to see if the extremely sweet stranger followed her. The princess was brought back to reality by Diana's voice, standing next to a pile of books, who with a dissatisfied look announced the princess's long search. She asked if the princess had taken any interesting book from the library. To read, the girl handed him the unfortunate tale and asked for it to be returned to its place on the shelf. Abigail's thoughts were occupied by a recent encounter with a young man. The girl was interested in who he was, what his name was, and why she was invaded by such a wave of strong feelings when she was near him. The image of the stranger did not leave my head, and, for the first time, my heart beat so fast. And quickly, thanks to the boy. She felt something similar recently when she danced with Lachiel. But it was purely by surprise. Trembling feelings for which she was definitely not ready now. Embarrassed the princess. And now she greatly regretted not daring to ask the young man's name. But she really didn't want him to know a single thing about her embarrassed part. And blushing, and that is the only reason she ran away, so as not to leave an even worse impression. A voice in her head told her she was doing something wrong, and that she should be Princess Violetta, not a girl named Abigail. Diana reminded the girl about the upcoming dinner scheduled with the Duke of Edelgard. The princess turned around and said she remembered the meeting, and that she would surely be there, but that the young woman's gloomy appearance was difficult to hide from the lady-in-waiting. Diana unexpectedly promised to keep it a secret, but she did not specify exactly what. Abigail shuddered and began to get confused in the letters, but immediately exhaled when she heard Diana refer to the forbidden book Lady de Barriere. With a knowing look, she stated that Her Highness is already at the age when they start being interested in such things. And there is nothing to be ashamed of. In the palace hall, courtiers hurried about before the next celebration in honor of the 5th Princess Violetta. Subjects in white gloves carried boxes with precious jewels in their hands. Everything was under Lachiel's strict control, who hurried to inquire about the princess's well-being. Louis's lady-in-waiting, sitting next to the girl, enthusiastically admired the beauty and manners of the Duke. The attendant opened a red velvet box, which contained a brilliant necklace of yellow diamonds. Lachiel did not warn about such an event with jewelry, so the princess was a little sad, because he promised them to have lunch together. But now a group of servants with jewelry are standing in front of her. All the ladies-in-waiting were crazy about the jewels they saw, handmade by the dwarves. But now Abigail did not share their admiration. The Duke brought one of the necklaces close to the girl's neck for her to try on. Couldn't he have called someone else for all this? She asked, to which she received a negative answer. Everything must be special, and the first experience in these things is very important, said the young man, placing a pendant with diamonds on his neck. She said he looked like a fool, knowing very well that the Duke did not like such answers and statements. The princess did not stay indignant for long when she saw beautiful and brilliant high-quality diamonds. The look of the jewelry exceeded all limits of admiration. The girl worried whether she would look like a house of fortunes if, after receiving them, she smiled happily, looking at the bracelet that fit perfectly on her wrist. Alternatively, you can simply hug the Duke and express your deep gratitude solely for the sake of performance. Lachiel held an elegant slipper made by the royal master of Brancel in his hands, and it seemed that Louisa was much happier than she was. The young man knelt down to try on the shoe, which, fortunately, it was the perfect size. Everything was so luxurious and beautiful that the princess began to feel like she was in a fairy tale. The girl asked Lachiel to tell her she was beautiful, but she heard from the Duke an answer about her madness, which quickly ruined the fairy tale atmosphere. The young man, snapping his fingers, asked all the courtiers to leave the hall and leave them alone. He started the conversation by asking if the princess had any worrisome problems she would like to discuss. The heroine asked to forget her words and only wanted to know how she would feel if someone else said that. The Duke did not understand what she meant, thinking that perhaps someone had abused her before. The princess got angry and started shaking her head. The Duke approached. He bent down and lifted the hem of the girl's dress, exposing her leg, which surprised the young woman. The girl screamed and asked why the boy was doing this, thinking that he was now openly harassing her. Lachiel replied that he wanted to give her a real gift, making her shudder with surprise, because there is no need to lift the hem of her dress to receive a gift. The Duke put a leather holster on his leg, which apparently contained a real weapon. The girl took a golden revolver with carved motifs that, as Lachiel said, was secretly developed in Molino. It was equipped with 4 barrels and could fire 4 times in a row. The first time the princess saw such a weapon, you looked uninterested when you looked at the diamonds. But now you look happy when you see the weapon, said the young man. Luderick had poor aim, so he promised to send another shooting instructor so the princess could use a revolver with confidence. The Duke liked the girl's emotions. He sighed and asked if she wanted to change positions. Abigail completely forgot that she was sitting with her leg naked almost up to the thigh, tightly holding the gifted weapon. Her face flushed with shame, calling the Duke a shameless man who does as he pleases. She quickly pulled down the hem of her dress. Lachiel, taking the opportunity, considered the idea good and, in a joking tone, suggested speeding up the marriage. After all, whatever happens, she has to get married later, and laughed at his interlocutor's reaction. That said, it was not in vain that he saved her from death. This news sounded unexpected, because when she became a maid, she never thought about marriage. But now, we must not forget the new role of Princess Violetta. Since childhood, Lachiel was raised according to the principles and moral norms of Edelgard. After a series of murders and supposed accidents, Lachiel even thought of a general gathering of soldiers and planning an uprising. If he really did this, regardless of whether he won or lost, the stigma of traitors would still fall on his family, which is what all other imperial officials wanted. He vehemently did not want to sacrifice innocent Edelgardians, their large families, and their young children. Therefore, he decided to carry out the scam with confidence. He said, placing a beautiful crown on the princess's head. The princess suggested that with his help, the Duke wants to take revenge on the murderers and criminals. Abigail, who is not related by blood to the emperor, in this case will become empress, and the son she gives birth to will become emperor. The line of imperial succession was interrupted by the madman currently ruling, after which the lineage passes to the Edelgard family. But so far, most likely the emperor doesn't even think about it. But then, turning into a corpse and lying in the cold earth, he finds out how one of the Edelgards, whom he fiercely hated and feared his entire life, successfully seized the imperial power throne. Lachiel was a man who wanted to start a revolution without open attacks or bloodshed. That destiny which confused him all that fateful day of Violetta's death gave him the opportunity to perfect his plan by using the young woman as the princess. The story moves to Vladimiro, which opened for the first time since the imperial coronation, a place that did not even receive guests on the day of the emperor's name day, now opens its doors for the sake of a princess. It is quite obvious that the royal nobility was against such a large-scale event. But after imperial pressure, the capital fell silent again. The reminder of Ludwig's bloody response was a kind of reminder of past years' fears. So he knew that this could serve as the beginning of new fears. At that moment, ordinary people, who knew nothing about the political relationships of the nobles, continued with interest the story of the stupid princess. The girl was excommunicated from the palace for a long time because she was considered a stupid girl and mentally retarded who had also lost her brother and her uncle. Common people sympathized with the difficult fate and praised His Majesty's generosity. So the fifth princess now deserves a better reward. And calling, the new princess in a luxurious dress, a diamond necklace, and a crown on her head was sitting in a carriage and was completely ready for such an important event. In the end, the emperor managed to win the hearts and the minds of most good people and common ones. His prejudices that the emperor hates the crown prince after such an indifferent attitude towards his death are reduced by his sincere concern for the fifth princess, Violetta, and the opening of Vladimiro towards her. Now he must look like a good father in the eyes of the people, which explains the mixed feelings and a certain hatred from Abigail. The carriage stopped in Vladimiro. Lachiel, whose appearance was simply impeccable in a white formal suit, was waiting for the princess with anticipation. The princess asked to accompany her, gently offering her hand, because who else but him would take it? She looked at the duke with fascination and noticed that, for some reason, he was extremely, truly perfect on the outside. The girls didn't even notice how he skillfully grabbed a white glove and hurried to the celebration. Truly, everything looked like it was taken from a fairy tale. Luxurious halls with red carpets, many subjects loudly greeting Sir Duke Edelgard, and His Highness Violetta of Grandonia, Moray Edelgard upon entering. The girl proceeded solemnly, a little worried, but convinced that everything would be fine. The Duke imposingly caressed her hand as they majestically passed their subjects. It's strange to think that the hand that caught her was now the only one she could trust. They approached the Golden Arch and stopped in front of the stairs, near which the imperial family had already gathered. This young couple looked perfect today. The first person the princess saw was Emperor Louis, who was already in the hall among the crowd. It is known that the emperor should always appear last at such events. So why was he here before them? Or is this also some kind of compensation? Or perhaps this sign was a mockery on his part. But whatever it was, the princess could not take a step back under any circumstances. They approached the emperor, then greeted his daughter, and supposedly tried to smile cordially. The hand of the monster, wearing the father's mask, touched the bare shoulder and made the girl tremble. But she stood firm and smiled sweetly in response, because now she was forced to wear the mask, having become an accomplice to the rebels who had the power to interrupt the imperial line of inheritance. All gathered held golden cups of wine in their hands. The princess gathered her courage. She raised her cup and expressed the wish to drink to his imperial greatness. Following her words, the people raised their cups in honor of the emperor and prepared to drink. The assembled guests of various ranks and titles unanimously supported the unanimous wish, unanimously proclaiming the name and honor of the emperor. Ludwig's sinister and furious gaze was not long in coming. He turned towards the princess, clearly implying that she had done something wrong. Duke Lechel observed what was happening nearby the whole time. His lessons were not in vain, and although she was not yet empress, she still dared to proclaim a toast in the name of the emperor in Vladimiro. He thought, bringing a precious glass to his lips. But no one paid attention to him, because everyone was fascinated by her elegance and her beautiful live music. "I hope you're happy with my gift," said Ludwig, who was standing next to him, examining the high-ranking people who had come. The princess played along and said she really enjoyed the event. Mom will also be moved by the attention His Majesty has shown her, she told Ludwig, noticing how he watched Pascalia, to which he rudely replied that his mother would only be truly moved when he died. The princess noticeably darkened at this statement. It cannot be considered a joke, because it was said by the emperor himself, who still allows himself to blame Her Majesty, the Queen, for his own treason. He was clearly not in the mood for a friendly conversation, considering the fact that she raised her cup in Vladimiro without noticing the emperor. The princess got scared and hurried to apologize in her new role as a good princess, and admitted that she had behaved shamelessly. To which the emperor asked not to think about it, since this celebration was exclusively dedicated to her. The main event will begin after he leaves this place. Obviously, it is impossible to have a perfect exception even in Vladimiro, he said. Ludwig turned around and silently disappeared from sight while the guests were busy talking and discussing the new princess. One of the ladies-in-waiting called the princess and told her that the first dance would be a waltz, which she supposedly should dance with Duke Lachiel. Because of her confidence in the pair with the Duke, the girl suddenly, urgently wanted to choose someone else more suitable for this role. But she quickly changed her mind and asked to call Lachiel because during the dance she kept stepping on her partner's feet and let only him suffer this fate. And it would be much more natural to call the one who accompanied him before the celebration. The Duke confidently took the girl by the waist and spun her in a gentle waltz to the rhythm of the live music. The ladies-in-waiting watched their romantic dance with delight and found the couple very charming. The next moment, the princess still stepped on Lachiel's foot. He smiled and asked if she had pressed his foot too hard, to which the girl replied that at least she didn't do it as often as usual. He asked her to dance calmly and not to press her feet calmly. The girl looked at him and smiled sweetly. Perhaps some of those present felt sympathy for her, some hostility or hatred, some even disdain. But no matter how they looked, the girl felt none of the above towards them. The princess and the ladies-in-waiting watched the people gathered in the hall, who were discussing something, laughed, and mainly paid attention to each other. Abigail supposed that no one would dare approach Princess Violetta in front of so many people, although deep down they longed to look closer and study. Suddenly, Lewis's gaze turned towards the crowd, as if she saw someone familiar there. The princess noticed this and asked the girl if she recognized anyone, since she was looking so intently. She pointed to a young, cute girl in a light blue dress, blonde hair and big eyes. She called her sister and told her that she actually didn't have time to meet her, and rushed to the palace. If this girl is Lewis's sister, then she must be the eldest daughter of the Montreal house. And next to Grace, the first son of Clarence, the couple is famous for having the same name. Louisa asked for permission to leave for a while, but Abigail also expressed her desire to meet her sister, to which the lady-in-waiting was very happy and rushed to her sister. Diana leaned over and whispered to the princess that there was no need to take advantage of this naive boy. The new Violetta laughed and suggested that, in that case, they should meet Diana's sister first. Milia saw Viscount Nathan in the distance and pointed in his direction, enraging Diana, who was next to her. In fact, the Nathan family was now directly in front of their little runaway daughter. Most likely Diana would have an unpleasant conversation with her parents, from whom she ran away secretly to work as a maid. Louisa threw herself into the arms of her dear sister Grace. The princess stepped back and waited for Louisa to finish the carefree joy of the reunion. The young people saw the princess and introduced themselves. The girl was named Grace Clarence, and the young man was the first son of the Clarence family and the captain of the capital's defense, and he also bore the name Grace of Clarence. The next to introduce himself was a majestic man with a dazzling white suit and medals on his chest. It was Clarence, the governor of the Menebis region. The princess considered it an honor to make new acquaintances and thanked everyone for their greetings. Governor Clarence was responsible for protecting the southeastern waters of the empire. Sleeping Dragon, a hero of the Cropel family, a legendary imperial naval officer. Furthermore, there is something more important than rank. The crown prince, who would become the next emperor. He was Emperor Louis's cousin. During the reign of the previous emperor, the Clarence family, immediately after the Edelgard family, held the greatest power among the four marquises. But this story was not as simple as it seemed. After the current emperor killed all his brothers and took the imperial throne with extreme cruelty, the former Marquis of Clarence, after witnessing the Queen's death, who was his sister, and the death of his own nephews, returned home and committed suicide. When the family was destroyed like this, the current Marquis was exiled, having been appointed commander of the Cropel family's territorial waters, which at that time were simply infested with hordes of pirates. He, however, turned into a hero, returned home, and it is safe to say that the current Clarence family was only able to reach the top thanks to him. Clarence did not know that Miss Mondrel would become the 5th princess's lady-in-waiting, and he talked about it. Furthermore, he also did not expect to meet the princess in person without his own will, added the man, and with a joking tone asked not to add unnecessary problems for him. Drawing everyone's attention, the princess smiled back at him and said she didn't want to cause any trouble, to which Clarence joked that there was no need to get close to them for the sake of some lady-in-waiting. The princess was beginning to get used to his humiliating attitude and that insidious masculine smile. "You can stop, teacher," a male voice was heard from behind. The girl looked at Duke Laquil, who appeared nearby. The governor greeted the young man by standing at attention, to which he asked him to stop with an awkward greeting at this time. The princess thought they were somewhat similar and seemed like close people, finding it strange that Laquil called the man a teacher. "You were enough for me, so don't even think about using me as a teacher for your cousin," smiled the governor, but the duke insisted that if he tries, something good will definitely come out of it. The girl felt like she was experiencing déjà vu, because the two young men had a very similar aura, judging by their skillful statements among themselves. The conversation, full of sarcasm, continued. Now the governor spoke of his displeasure with the duke for the lack of learning ability, but the duke believed that all feelings were due only to his great love for him. All this time, the princess watched their teasing and disputes without bothering anyone, and smiling. But the next minute, the girl hurried to leave his company, since she didn't want to bother with them anymore. The governor called the duke a superficial thinking man and hinted that he knew her thoughts. The young man decided to find out in more detail. Clarence explained that he really didn't want to know why he brought the girl here, that she had spent her whole life locked up, and with a serious expression on his face, he asked not to try to incite others by ruining the poor girl's life. Laquil looked at him silently and waited for a pause before delivering his next verbal blow. "Even if that's the case, you still can't escape from me," said the duke with a smile, and asked for final recognition. The restless Louisa approached the princess and asked if she had finished her conversation with this terrible man, the Marquis. These words were just heard by his son, who jokingly confirmed his father's terrifying appearance. One of the ladies-in-waiting hurried to inform Abigail that the Count of Montreal and his wife were approaching them. A beautiful, sweet woman and a respectable man appeared in front of the girls. The princess considered it an honor to meet the Mondrel family and greeted him at the celebration. The Count of Mondrel is a representative of one of the 11 advisory families to the emperor, as well as the commander of the capital Defense General Staff. The countess is the owner of the most luxurious boutique in the capital. Laquil also considered the Mondrel family good. The countess said she was very worried about her daughter after she left home, because it seemed that she would only cause problems for the princess. To which the new Violetta replied that she could only thank them for having such a beautiful daughter, Louisa, who helps in many ways. The man whispered that Louisa was not the type of girl who could help anyone, to which he received a clear elbow to the stomach from his wife. He quickly pretended to choke and said nothing more about it. At that moment, a subject approached the count, informing him of an urgent matter, after which the man asked permission to leave for a while, which was an excellent stratagem to avoid the conversation. The countess noticed a necklace on the princess's neck and asked if it was the jewelry everyone was talking about. It turned out the rumors were true, and the necklace of yellow diamonds, which was made by a gnome, a jewelry master, asked the lady happily. Furthermore, there were also rumors about the fifth princess's palace, since the previous duke was never seen in scandals and did not spend much money. The people, of course, realized this, and the question immediately arose whether this was an act of love for a cousin or for a lover. Most likely the princess will hear more than once what she just said, and it is better to prepare in advance, advised the countess, because all the girls look enthusiastically at the dress and the princess's diamonds. She meant that the necklace was indeed very beautiful, and that it was the first time she had seen such large yellow diamonds, whose color was bright and attractive. But Abigail replied that she would gladly wear the countess's necklace. She was embarrassed and would never have thought that the princess would like such a small peridot, and called her a rather modest person. No wonder the other girls looked at the princess with envy. The countess asked permission to introduce her cousin Rodrigo to her, who owned many rare precious stones. The girl politely accepted the countess's invitation to meet. Rodrigo's young cousin was also Violeta's cousin. And first of all, you must thank the lady for introducing him to her. Suddenly, a very familiar face appeared in front of Violeta. She had recently seen this young man in the library, and at that moment, she experienced the most trembling feelings. She recognized him immediately, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Trying not to look so as not to look again, the girl turned her head in the opposite direction. The countess introduced Marquis Rodrigo as he approached. He was a blue-eyed blonde, naturally delighted to meet the fifth princess. But Abigail found him a little annoying now. Young Marquis Rodrigo was the only son of the princess who escaped the current emperor, who killed all his brothers and sisters and was considered the emperor's only nephew, in addition to owning Rodrigo's lands, since his father died suddenly, several years ago. From generation to generation, the Rodrigo house maintained political neutrality alongside the Mondreal family. The princess said that they had finally met Marquis Rodrigo, because it turns out he was her cousin. She asked why Aunt Renee Veer hadn't come to today's banquet, to which she heard in response that she was feeling a little unwell. The princess decided it was time to get to the point, and asked the countess when the exhibition in Rodrigo would take place. The Rodrigo exhibition is considered the best on the continent, and Her Highness will be very honored if she attends this event. The countess seemed delighted. Carl warned that this was not a place for a picnic, and that it might not be interesting, which caused the countess to become indignant with rude words. The princess admitted that, in fact, much has been written about her great-grandfather in books, who developed the industrial industry, and she would like to know more about all this. Rodrigue wine has a very deep taste, and when people see the high quality of Rodrigue fabrics, they find it hard to imagine that there is a wonderful winery in the same region. So she is especially curious to know the secret of the balance between industry and agriculture by visiting the exhibition. The countess noticed the girl's good knowledge and was sure that her great-grandfather would be happy to hear it. The woman noticed that the princess liked to read, while Violeta said that books are her only friends because she is often alone. Surprised, the countess covered her mouth with her hand and even cried at what she heard. It turned out that she is a member of several noble ladies in a literary salon, and she would gladly invite her there. Although the status of these women is so low, they all love to read. The Montreal Salon is known for gathering the best of society, because only the most famous people can participate in it. This literary salon is more focused on information exchange, because only key figures were invited there, a great success. But the princess was even luckier. Perhaps the countess felt guilty about the Marquis's rude comments, and that's why she invited her, but in any case, thank her for her courtesy. Fearing causing trouble to the countess, she gratefully accepted the invitation, to which the lady suggested going to an exhibition together next month. Since Carl travels often, the woman really wanted to go together, and told the princess her wishes. The new Violeta happily agreed to accompany the countess on an interesting pre-trip. Everyone the girl met at the celebration only talked about dresses, necklaces, shoes, and of course, about Lachiel. But Hylavella, who seemed to be looking for a fight with the princess, did not come up to introduce herself the entire evening. Even Vilquius greeted cheerfully, and then began to communicate with the rest of the guests. Before she realized it, Empress Pascalia had disappeared along with the queens, and the fourth prince and Marquis Cardinger, whom she feared the most, did not appear at all. The ladies kept approaching the girl, asking about the beautiful large yellow diamond and the precious bracelet. All this talk started to tire the girl. It seemed that it was finally time for a break. The lady-in-waiting Diana handed the princess a note, pointing out that it was from Duke Edelgard. The girl said it was urgent and asked for permission to leave. The trick with the note was a wonderful way to avoid a boring communication. The heroine asked Diana if she knew Sir Thornton. It turned out that the girl knew the Duke's assistant, Edelgard. And why shouldn't she marry him, if both are experts in criticism? She joked. The young woman warned the lady-in-waiting about tiredness and the decision to hide from prying eyes so that others would not see how she spent her time idly. Abigail went out onto the balcony where there were no people. Her feet hurt a lot from the heels, so the girl decided to take off her shoes for a while and rest. She stood barefoot on the floor and was glad she could breathe calmly. The princess leaned against the balcony railing and began to look at the stars on this dark night. "You will catch a cold if you walk barefoot," an unfamiliar voice echoed in the silence from behind. A boy I recently met in the library asked her if she liked reading Lady de Bourriere. The barefoot girl felt awkward, and her only desire was to disappear so as not to feel the awkward situation. The young woman turned around saying it wasn't the book she was looking for, but just a small mistake. But she thanked the young man for his kindness at that moment. The boy found the answer strange, because last time she clearly heard the princess pronounce the name of the book, and she was clearly looking for it. The heroine could not remember if she pronounced these words, or if the boy was saying it on purpose. Not knowing what to answer, she looked silently at the stranger. Abigail asked him if he knew who she was, asking him to forget everything about that book here, and not to tell anyone for the rest of her life. "You really should have said that, even if I guessed it randomly," replied the young man, causing the princess to blush right in front of him. It seems the guy lied on purpose and, curiously, successfully. The girl got indignant, but the young man hurried to reply that she also lied by saying she hadn't read that book. "All right, I guess we're even. But I didn't lie when I said I hadn't read it," said the heroine, to which the stranger pretended to believe her. The lady smiled. The jokes with the boy seemed very cute to her. It was a pity that such an elegant man saw this side of her. But actually worrying about it made her carefree. She looked at her shoes and announced her imminent departure. But the young man asked her to wait. He politely took off his blue corduroy jacket as the girl stood, and she didn't understand why he was doing this. The young man dropped his jacket on the floor. He asked barefoot Violetta to stand on it, and said Eckhart de Veron, taking the audacity to introduce himself first, because he didn't wait for the princess to ask his name. The princess was surprised that he was from the Veron family, and greeted the young man, who asked to be called Eckhart. She said she would call him Sir, and that she intended to enter, so there was no need to go so far. He knew that the lady had just arrived here, and it was rude to listen to how tired her legs were. So the young man simply suggested that she take a break for a while. "And I would love for you to keep me company," admitted the boy, placing his hand on his chest. The girl blushed again, and asked if Veron was trying to seduce her in such an unusual way. The young man apologized and asked her why she thought so. He knelt on one knee, making it clear that he had no selfish goal in seducing the young woman. But if you think about it, you can imagine that Veron wants to seduce. He joked. Abigail no longer understood anything when he joked, and went to tell the truth. When asking him if it was normal for her to so easily recognize actions as seductive, the boy agreed with a smile on his face. He said it was the first time he felt something like this, and he is not sure why. So he prays that she will be favorable to seduction, and that it will be an honor. The girl's feet were really cold, so without thinking, she hurried to stand on the jacket that was on the floor, and found it convenient. The girl pointed out that the young man is at that age when everyone expects him to take a risk to defend his honor. But she explained that there is no honor worth risking life for. So he was never a knight. Her Highness knew the reputation well, and the honor of the Veron family. But as the young man said, most scandals are not serious enough to affect the honor of his family. The princess thought that the man's current family was quite noisy and scandalous, but mainly the young man's aura differs from his father's aura. The heroine still considered this knowledge such a difficult task. Veron also tried to ask the girl a couple of questions, to which he received a negative answer. But suddenly he changed his face and grabbed the girl by the shoulders. The princess, who was not in the mood for such a thing, screamed, but the boy made a gesture meaning silence and looked towards the door. It seems someone was behind the door, and it would be bad if rumors spread about the fifth princess enjoying a secret affair with a man at her first banquet. The two fell silent and tried not to make any sound when the secret stranger passed behind the door. Veron said he left so you can exhale and not worry. But the princess was sure that at least one person definitely saw her walk onto the balcony. She asked the boy if he thought of leaving immediately after her. He replied that he perfectly understood the excitement, and he would wait a couple of minutes. But this was not enough for the girl, and everything would seem too suspicious. Pointing to the open balcony overlooking the street, the young woman invited Eckhart to leave her company for her sake. That is, by another path that did not pass through the main entrance. She clearly hinted that the young man would have to jump. But the second floor seemed quite high. But he happily agreed to do it for her with a guarantee. Veron expressed his desire to receive something he could keep with him until their next meeting. The princess had no other choice, so she decided to give the young man her white glove. Slowly taking it off her hand, the boy jumped over the balcony railing and, lowering his legs, he promised to return the personal item to the girl very soon. After only a couple of seconds, he skillfully jumped and found himself safely below the balcony. And safe, waving his hand at God. The princess, wanting to put on her shoes, realized that the young man had left his luxurious jacket on the balcony and hurried to leave. But behind the door, there was still a masculine shadow, watching the young people's conversation the whole time. And it was the Duke. The girl hurried back to the hall with the guests. But Eckhart's sweet features could not leave her mind. After taking a couple of steps, she bumped into Lachiel, who asked her if her break was over. Not expecting to see him here, the girl loudly asked why he was there. And it could be he who opened the balcony door a little earlier, while enthusiastically talking to the Viscount. But even if he saw them, he shouldn't misinterpret them. She is very perceptive, Abigail reasoned. It turned out that one of the ladies-in-waiting informed the Duke that the princess hurried away to rest from a large number of people. But all the ladies-in-waiting seemed to be busy dancing and talking with other people, and they weren't worried about Her Highness. Lachiel noticed the absence of a glove on the girl's hand, and he asked her where she was going. But unfortunately, the glove was in the hands of the young Viscount, who set such unexpected conditions for the girl and took her away. As she walked, a story occurred to Abigail about how she wanted to take it off because it was stuffy, and then accidentally dropped it into the garden from the balcony. The Duke has not yet started to learn the details of the disappearance of the princess's glove. And to escape the conversation, she quickly tried to approach the countesses who were in front. With a victorious smile, the princess ran towards them, promising Lachiel that she would be back soon. At that moment, a blue jacket casually hanging on the balcony railing caught her attention, recently left there by someone. Lachiel approached, picked it up, and he saw the bright badge of the Viscount family flaunting, and then brutally threw the men's clothes from the balcony. The action takes place the next day. A bearded man in a large hat with a feather said that His Majesty personally appointed him as His Highness's teacher. So, following His Majesty's wishes, she should study like a pious student. And he asked what the princess thinks of philosophy. The girl and the teacher were in her room. She suggested that philosophy is the science of reflection. The answer was acceptable, but all science sometimes needs more details. For example, archaeology. But in any case, the teacher was happy that His Highness gave a different impression than the first prince. And now he admitted he felt relieved. She politely thanked today's fourth teacher. Lessons in economics, political science, philosophy, and other subjects followed one after another, as Kyle brought huge piles of books into the room that, according to him, were required reading. And she considered that it was most likely the Emperor's book compensation too. Calling the endless class schedule a real hell, Lady Honordiana asked the princess to go to the meeting room. But today it was nothing like it. She buried her head in the pillow and asked Luisa if that schedule made any sense. The maid replied that she was sure, because His Majesty had appointed so many teachers if His Highness couldn't cope. But the princess was not satisfied with the answer. She just wanted someone to confirm the absurdity of the difficult schedule for her. The lady-in-waiting quickly tried to expose His Majesty's indiscretion. But it was already too late. Milia decided to take everything into her own hands. It is quite understandable that the princess finds the lessons difficult, because she started her studies very late. So she is glad that His Majesty personally assigned her the best teachers. Furthermore, the princess is too intelligent a young woman. Despite this, there is a saying that going too far is as bad as not going at all. So studying too much can have a detrimental effect. It was just what the princess needed, especially the part where the lady-in-waiting calls the girl intelligent. Disappointed, Luisa sulked and lamented that Milia said the same thing, only in a longer way. In complex, the support helped the princess, who persistently decided to try to overcome all difficulties until Diana reminded her that it was time to leave. A message about the arrival of President Duke Edelgard was heard in the mansion. Lachiel, in a suit and tie, walked down the hallway towards an important private council meeting. The subject of the bundle initiated the opening speech of the ordinary secret meeting, number 4887. The Duke interrupted him and clarified that this was not just another meeting. The Milniro Kingdom officially announced that it had conquered the Liege province from the Duchy of Ingust. It was confirmed that the Grand Duke Ingust had been defeated on the battlefield. Lachiel began. One of those present asked if the body of the murdered duke had already been found. According to the envoy from Milnir, the body was found. But another young man demanded other options. The Kingdom of Milnir was their ally. The Duchy of Ingust, in turn, is allied with Peloburg, which was also their biggest ally. And dangerous. In the council, they discussed the important question of a small choice between two options: getting along with Milnir, or ending up in a dangerous situation. With Peloburg, they couldn't leave Milniro at all. A large amount of military supplies comes from there. But Count Mayer said they could replace the supplies with another manufacturer. But the availability of money does not guarantee the purchase of weapons, said someone present. But Peloburg was absolutely not worth such a serious betrayal. During the next minute, the men fell silent, trying to think about the pressing problem and find solutions. The first prince spoke about whether they preferred an alliance with the Peloburg Empire, whose policies could change dramatically after the imminent death of the emperor, than an alliance with the Kingdom of Milniro, which had been their longtime ally. And regardless of whether they abandon Milniro or join them, he believes the result will still be exactly the same. Lachiel agreed with the first prince about the alliance with Milniro, which is superior to the alliance with Peloburg. And it cannot be ignored that the alliance lasts about 200 years. They always provide due support. The Duke placed his hand on a large pile of papers that lay on the table in front of him. Lachiel pointed out other targets to which the first prince's speech was directed, in addition to the values of Milniro itself. And he asked if he was accidentally thinking about starting a war with Peloburg. The princess's training continued despite the girl being quite exhausted, and she was expecting another music lesson. She blushed and turned around when she saw her music teacher. And this was the young man she definitely didn't expect to see now. The lady-in-waiting Diana hurried to introduce the new teacher, Sir Eckhart de Veron, the eldest son of Marquis Veron. The ladies-in-waiting said goodbye, and the princess asked them to leave to receive the lesson. She quickly hurried to Veron to ask him to return the glove. Eckhart joked that after this, she would immediately kick him out. And he called the girl quite intelligent. He placed the glove in the young woman's palm and told her that he had come here for a different reason. Sitting elegantly at the piano keys, the young man asked not to be misunderstood, since today he met the princess as a teacher. Abigail did not expect him to be a teacher, to which he hurried to demonstrate his skills so that the girl would treat him as a teacher. A beautiful melody spread throughout the room, touching the princess to the depths of her soul. Abigail listened as the young man's fingers seemed to fly over the keys, up and down, producing such wonderful sounds. The skill and virtuoso playing of the young teacher did not leave the girl indifferent for a second. She thought he would play an unknown composition, but it was a very familiar melody that her mother once sang to her, evoking a warm feeling of nostalgia with his performance. Abigail, closing her eyes, remembered her sweet mother, who sang a song while her father played the piano. And everyone around, both adults and children, listened to them with happy smiles and enthusiastic eyes. Abigail remembered her dog, who lived with her when she was a child, and how she cried after his death. But she didn't remember his name, considering it impossible to keep such bitter memories. A feeling of despair invaded her, and sadness, because Abigail Daloa had long been dead to everyone. Although those happy moments still haunt somewhere deep in my heart, now everything seemed like a simple, stupid illusion. This song now warmed her soul so much that her heart ached. Eckhart finished playing and asked her if she liked his performance, which the princess considered simply magnificent. But the young man noticed that the girl's gaze was filled with melancholy and sadness. The girl had to lie that the nanny had sung this song before. The young man suggested that the melody was very dear to her, and he completely shared the feelings that arose. After the conversation, Eckhart calmed down and silently put aside the empty chatter, as if respecting her feelings. Diana called and announced the arrival of Duke Edelgard. Veron realized that it was time to leave as quickly as possible, but Lachiel was not in the mood to let him go so quickly. The Duke stared fixedly at Veron and fell silent, clearly awaiting his reaction. He, in turn, greeted as the princess. Perplexed, did not understand why the Duke came whenever he felt like it. He approached the girl and slowly kissed her head. Abigail knew very well how much the Duke liked to flaunt his close relationship in front of other people. Eckhart was behind them the whole time and watched with interest what was happening. Lachiel said he knew Veron's excellent reputation, and he personally appointed him as Violetta's teacher, to which the teacher sincerely thanked His Highness, expressing great honor. They said goodbye with a firm handshake. Veron in turn kissed the princess's hand and said goodbye. He fulfilled the condition and returned what belonged to the girl, as he promised at their first meeting. And of course, the glove, which was in the most visible place. It immediately caught the Duke's attention. The girl set out to invent the story of the lost glove, but she could only say that Sir Baran found it in the garden and brought it to give as a gift. She was so flustered that she ended up lying awkwardly, because theoretically Sir Baran could not have known the owner of the found item from anywhere. But the answer did not impress the Duke, and apparently today it didn't bother him at all. He reported that a couple of days ago Grand Duke Ingust died in the war, and Milniro managed to conquer the province of Liege in his duchy. Ingust will fall soon. The private council supported the Milniro side, 6 against 5, and most likely the first prince wants to start a war. If he had not been present at the meeting, the council would have sided with Pelober. But the first prince personally made a proposal to support Mil Nero. For a soldier like the first prince, war was an excellent opportunity for advancement and an excellent military merit. But he will also face enormous responsibility, much heavier if he is the one who pushed his homeland into war. People will want to know who caused this horror and who is to blame. And even being the son of the emperor, he surely won't be able to avoid accusations and threats against him. Day 99 of spring and the end of the first season of the year marked the beginning of the most anticipated celebration in the empire in honor of the first goddess of ancient mythology, Grandonia, the mother of creation who discovered the world and gave birth to the gods. For common people, the festival begins with evening performances at the theater, while for the nobility, Inumilas begins with a visit to the evening opera at the Imperial Theater. Lachiel and the princess were sitting in the theater hall. The performance was just ending. The girl could not hold back tears, which clearly did not please the young man sitting next to her. She considered the young man a rather insensitive person and heartless who did not share the sad ending with her. It is well known that the Duke was not distinguished by sentimentality. But so as not to hear the crying, he hurried to take a handkerchief out of his pocket. He wiped his cheek with the handkerchief and handed it to her, expecting the young woman to quickly calm down. It seemed to the girl more and more that the Duke was intentionally behaving strangely in public, trying to be overly affectionate. The production ended. Emperor Louis admired her to madness, calling the lead actress the greatest prima donna of Grandonia. The malicious brother Vilquius was also here. They clashed, but he was forced to let the princess go ahead. Even in such small matters, they had to follow the rules of hierarchy, which greatly saddened the young woman. She approached the lead actress and thanked her for her incredible performance. That touched her heart. It must be hard to convey the pain of a mother who has lost a child, Abigail suggested, to which the lady spoke of her two beloved children. The eldest daughter was 4 years old, and the youngest would have been 2 if she had lived. The princess thought it was rude of her to ask such a question, but the actress said everything was fine, and that she was sure the baby was in a better place now. The princess felt relieved after such words, and smiled sweetly, hoping to see the lady on the same stage next year too. The theme of motherhood touched the girl. I wonder how her mother felt when she heard about her daughter's death, who was already overwhelmed with grief for a long time after her father's death. And if the daughter is executed for treason against the empire, then the family is doomed to suffer forever. It is better to let them live in prosperity and honor, but they will lose it. The princess tried to stop thinking about it and convinced herself of the rightness of the best choice she could make. But she felt sorry for her mother, who lived with the pain of her daughter's death, and she desperately wanted to tell her that her dear Abigail was still alive. Her thoughts were interrupted by Lachiel's voice. From the girl's face, it was clear that she was not in the mood to talk to anyone at this moment. And with the Duke in particular, the young man quickly changed his mind and said nothing more. At that moment, Kyle came running, almost out of breath and with a white paper package in his hand. He brought a message from Count Mayer and delivered it personally into the Duke's hands immediately. Such urgency caused irritation and a feeling of anger in Sir Edelgard. But mastering himself, he began to read the message. He said there was nothing serious. Only an important matter had arisen, and it was time for the princess to return without him with one of the ladies-in-waiting. It was Luisa, who was interested in knowing where the Duke had gone. But the princess only repeated his words about an urgent matter unknown to anyone. Suddenly, a lady with a child appeared at the door. The girl asked her mother to wait and brought her little hands towards her. The stranger bent down, carefully took his daughter in his arms, and hugged her tightly with all a mother's love. This moment caused the girl a strong pang for losing something important in life to her family. Turning away, she tried not to show Luisa her mood to avoid questions. by reporting that the crowd had become suffocating. The princess quickly tried to avoid all communication and to leave. She thought it would be fine. But after the opera, her heart seemed to crumble like sand. A deafening scream came from Luisa, who managed to alert the girl. Not looking where she was going, the princess crashed into a young man's chest, who turned out to be her trembling acquaintance Eckhart. Looking up, she saw Sir Veron looking at her with his big blue eyes very affectionately. She didn't want to show her tears and worries to anyone, so she hurried to wipe her moist eyes with the glove. Veron asked if Sir Duke Edelgard would accompany her to the opera today. But the Duke left for important matters that require his presence. So she returns to the palace alone. Without hearing her, Veron turned to Luisa with a small request, which the lady-in-waiting was ready to listen to attentively. Eckhart told her that the girl could not come to the princess's first celebration in such a bad mood. He then whispered something to Luisa. Luisa, with her head held high, spoke of the night market, which would be worth visiting, since it is very fun and the princess has never been to such an event. And Sir Veron would keep her company. Therefore, she offered to leave everything to her and go enjoy the festival with Sir Veron. The sound of carriage wheels passing resonated in the night through the small cobbled streets of the city. The princess did not consider it necessary to resist the invitation, and she sat in the carriage with a young man beside her. The opera evening is not the only entertainment of Anumala's. It would be a great loss to miss the big night fair that opens during the festival. Pison's Eastern Street is the busiest celebration spot. Therefore, the young man assured the princess should like it. Luisa insisted that it was time for the girl to relax and have fun for once. Strangely, Abigail's mood even improved. It remains to ensure that Lachil does not find out and does not get angry. But she really didn't want to return to that mood, asking how Sir Baron was going to answer for his actions if she did not end up having fun. And what if she is satisfied? The boy will win. If not, he will lose. It turns out the girl offered to make a bet. Eckhart asked her what she would receive as a victory. Abigail flirtatiously remarked that spending time with her could already be considered a reward, which was true in the young man's opinion. She politely asked him not to make her feel more awkward. Eckhart did not understand why the girl was experiencing such strange feelings. And he asked. The fact is that next to him, she felt like a girl in love, and she fiercely resisted these feelings. But naturally, she would never have told him until Eckhart decided to change the terms of the bet, saying that her fun would be considered a subjective decision. However, if she smiled even once that night, victory will be on her side. The princess could not help but agree to such conditions, and she gave permission for the next touching bet. As a joke, she suggested using fake names, and finally decided to call herself Rita. The small streets were adorned with garlands and yellow lanterns, creating a real festive atmosphere. The sounds of a wandering musician's violin, the dancing performers, the smell of pickled cucumbers from the cheese shops. As if a magical night came to life before her eyes. Eckhart asked if the princess liked the atmosphere and the festive mood, but since the discussion concluded, there was no room for a smile on the girl's cold face. The boy invited the young woman to sit and watch the passers-by and admire the wonders of the shops, because even this is very fun. People in colorful outfits and small children enthusiastically celebrated the occasion and had fun. They crowded around a man with a falcon, which, according to him, was one of the most distinguished species in these lands, insisting that this rare, large bird of prey would not be found even in the Krakow auction house. The princess saw the majestic large bird in person for the first time, and was very surprised that such a bird existed. Eckhart was also surprised to see a huge, living eagle right in front of him. The man released the rope tied to the bird's leg, and it flew away, hitting all the people with its truly magnificent giant wings. The girl tried to express her admiration for the eagle's flight with the same impassive face, so as not to lose the bet. The boy unexpectedly informed them of a complete mistake, and again suggested changing the terms of the dispute, deciding to exchange a smile for laughter so that the girl wouldn't walk around with a gloomy face, as if he had taken her to a funeral. The heroine agreed to such simple conditions, confident in victory over the young man. And finally, a smile of satisfaction appeared on her face, which incredibly pleased the young man, who hurried to say it. She again asked him not to embarrass her with such statements, but Eckhart recalled that she told him exactly the same thing recently. But that time it happened because she was astonished. And the boy laughed at this, honoring His Majesty's words. The girl's gaze fell on the black cage that stood on the table of the eagle owner, in which there was definitely someone alive. It seemed to be eagle chicks. Small and helpless, they sat in a cage, huddled closely together. The princess looked with tears in her eyes at the babies, who were squeaking loudly and were clearly excited. The girl was horrified when she realized that small eaglets were being sold, even if their mother was standing next to them. She introduced Empress Pascalia, the mother from whose arms her 5-year-old daughter was snatched and forced to be separated from her for 13 years. I immediately introduced my mother to her, so dear and incredibly affectionate to her daughter Abigail. Thoughts flooded the girl, so she wanted to quickly move away from the sad sight. In the girl's hand was a chain with a pendant featuring a large sky blue stone in a frame. The seller said the pendant cost 8 lantas and praised her excellent taste. The young man, surprised by the choice, offered to buy the pendant as a nice souvenir. The price was expensive for a maiden, but not for a princess. But Eckhart insisted on choosing something more expensive. But the girl liked this ornament, and the boy hurried to put it around the young woman's neck. The stone of the pendant was exactly the same color as the sincere blue eyes of Sir Baron. The princess, delighted, pointed in the other direction and expressed her desire to go there. A man with a hat and a bell in his hand invited people to place a bet and, if they were lucky, win 10 times more. The young people accepted such a tempting offer, and they had already prepared their coins. The risky act did not cause bitter disappointment, and all plans were destroyed in one blow. In the blink of an eye, they lost all their money and realized how terrible this insidious game is. All funds disappeared in a second into the swindler's pockets, and the gloomy young men were now thinking about how to return. Eckhart suggested going to the nearest pub, where there was a lot of fun now, which belongs to an acquaintance of his. He asked her to stay here and enjoy the delicious food that was instantly brought to the girl, calling her by the fictitious name Rita. The princess did not want the young man to leave her company, and she asked sadly, hoping to hear that he was not going anywhere. To which Eckhart replied that he promised his friend to help in the kitchen in exchange for delicious food and free drink, promising her that they would definitely return.